Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le Sénateur Routier,
Présent.
Monsieur le Sénateur Osif, Monsieur le Sénateur McLean, Monsieur le Sénateur Gorst,
Présent.
Monsieur le Sénateur Farnham, Monsieur le Sénateur Balash, Monsieur le Sénateur Green, Madame le Sénateur Ferguson, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément, Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre, Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent, Madame le Connétable de Sainte-Marie,
Présente.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Martin,
Présent.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur, Monsieur le Connétable de Gruville,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean,
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité, Madame le Député Martin,
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Southern, Madame le Député de Gruville,
Présente.
Madame le Député Hilton,
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Lefondre, Madame le Député de la Trinité,
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Lewis de Saint-Sauveur,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Tadier, Monsieur le Député Noel,
Présent.
Madame le Député de Saint-Jean,
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Higgins,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Masson,
Présent.
Madame le Député Pinel,
Présente.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Martin,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Bryans,
Présent.
Madame le Député de Saint-Pierre,
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Rondel,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Mezek, Monsieur le Député Lewis de Saint-Hélier,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Ouen,
Présent.
Madame le Député Dublé, Monsieur le Député Labby, Monsieur le Député Wickenden,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Bree,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Norton,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député MacDonald,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député de Sainte-Marie,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Truscott,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député McClinton.
Monsieur le greffier.
Prions Dieu. Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, donner le cœur et l'affection de tous ceux qui la composent, et de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, qui toutes les délibérations étant accompagnées de ta bénédiction, réussissent au bien et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il t'a plu de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite en la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous mets pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car toi, le règne, la puissance et le gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Monsieur le Sénateur Osif,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Sénateur McLean,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Sénateur Farnham,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Sénateur Balash,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Sénateur Green,
Présent.
Madame le Sénateur Ferguson,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre,
Sir, the constable is required to attend on the Royal Court this morning on parish business, and he should be with us within the hour, but has asked if he could be excused while he conducts that business, sir.
Yes. Défaut excusé.
So can we have a vote on that, please?
If you wish to vote on that, then we'll take the vote after the states are constituted, Deputy.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Député Southern, Monsieur le Député Lafondre,
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Tadier, Monsieur le Député Mezek, Madame le Député Doublé,
Défaut.
Monsieur le Député Labby, Monsieur le Député McClinton.
Défaut. We now come to consider then whether the Connétable of St Pierre can be défaut excusé. The deputy has called for a vote on that. Does anyone wish to speak on whether?
Sir, can I ask a, I'm not sure if it's a point of order, but certainly from information from the chair. Is it not the oath of all members that the state takes priority over all business? Does that also include the Royal Court?
The position is that the oath requires members to devote their time and to attend upon the states when necessary to do so. However, as members will be aware, there are circumstances in which a certain amount of latitude is granted where that's concerned. Obviously, cases of illness and also cases of state's business, and sometimes when there are other pressing concerns, and it's within the discretion of the Assembly to mark a member as excused from appearance, and that's what's before us at the moment, Deputy. So do you have?
Sorry, sir, if I can just seek a further clarification. Is there an order of precedence? In other words, is it laid down? For example, the States comes before the court, or the court comes before the States?
I'm not aware of anything which creates a statutory precedence one over the other.
So I'd just like to speak briefly in support of the Constable. We have on many times allowed others to be excused for various reasons, as you said, sir, but in particular, when you're attending the Royal Court, it's hardly a frivolous thing, sir.
Deputy, did you?
So if I explain the rationale, the first question I would ask is there anybody else from the parish of St Peter who could represent the affairs that are going through the Royal Court other than the Constable of St Peter? I suspect there are, but if not, why not? The public of this island have voted to keep the Connétables in the States, and that's because they want them here, presumably, to partake and assist during debates, and presumably also to vote on behalf of the States. And it seems to me that here we have an individual who's not absent on States business, but is absent on parish business, and that flags up a concern. And it seems to me that on the first point, I suspect there's somebody else from the parish who could be present at that point, and if not, there should be somebody delegated from the parish to represent in the Royal Court at that point. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think that the Connétables can have it both ways. And there are clearly times when, for personal reasons, we're given absent from this assembly, also on state's business and for elements of discretion. But I don't think it should be standard that when a Connétable, or anyone indeed, would I be given absent for attending in the Royal Court to assist with something to do with the St Brillard's administration? I think that is a moot point. And of course, there will be precedents in the past where that has been set, but I think it's important to put some kind of message down here today that we expect all members, first and foremost, to be present in the Assembly, especially if they're on island, rather than conducting private or parish business.
Sir, before we go to the vote, could I just raise the defo on Senators McLean and Farnham, please?
Defo is raised on Senators McLean and Farnham. Deputy St Peter?
Sir, I just wanted to state to the Assembly that the Constable has been called before the Royal Court on a matter of an extinguishment of a road in the parish, and the Constable, as the titular head of the parish, does have ultimate control over that. And I also think, sir, that the Deputy is taking a somewhat arbitrary approach, and it would make it very difficult for other members to make that judgment call in future. We all aim to be in the Assembly whenever we possibly can, because we take our oath very seriously. But if we, for very genuine reasons, cannot be here, it seems that if we vote for the Deputy's proposition here, then we could always be at the mercy of our colleagues, because we wouldn't understand whether they're going to take a positive or a negative view to our absence.
So on that basis, would it be helpful, sir, if I withdraw the proposition, noting the comments of the Deputy of St Peter that it's perhaps not fair on the Conetab, but I would like to refer this matter to PBC as a matter of urgency. I think it needs some kind of resolution. Happy to vote on it otherwise, but just trying to be reasonable.
Very well. Sorry, did you wish to...
Sir, I would much prefer to go to the vote, sir, because the deputy has made some points. The deputy has made some points which I would wish to answer to the Assembly, and if it's just allowed to be withdrawn, the challenges that he's made cannot be answered, sir.
Well, I think as the states were not in a position by common assent to excuse the Conetab, but it can only be now put to the vote. Now the states is constituted.
Can I lift the defo on Deputy Dubé?
Yes, the defo is on Deputy Dubé. Conetab, St John?
Thank you, sir. I think also on a point of clarity, dealing with an extinguishment of a road or otherwise is parish property, and therefore not only does the constable, but his 2, 3 or whatever number of procurers also have to be present. And it has to be all persons present, not just the constable or a procurer, and he could not in any way be deputised on this occasion.
Thank you for that clarification, Conetab. Very well. Those in favour of...
So is there a summing up?
Pale, please.
the appellant? I beg your pardon, Deputy?
There's usually a summing up, isn't there, on a proposition?
Well, firstly, is the proposition formally seconded? Yes, very well. Well, I'm prepared to let you sum up briefly on what should be an entirely straightforward administrative matter.
That's my proposition.
Thanks, sir.
Surely it's my proposition, sir. I propose that the constable be excused. Surely it's my proposition, therefore, for me to sum up.
Well, the position is that I think, in fact, the chairman is correct, Deputy. It was the chairman who stood and asked for the Conetab to be excused. You indicated you wish the matter to be put to the vote, but I think the chairman is correct. It is his proposition that should be put to the vote, and therefore his proposition that should be seconded, and he will be in a position to sum up. So I apologise for getting that slightly wrong.
So in that case, may I raise a point of order? I think we're allowed at any time during proceedings to ask a question of the Attorney General or the Solicitor General, who aren't here, and perhaps in their absence. And the reason I ask that is that we've had a statement, as if it were fact, which it may or may not be, from the Conetab of St John, that the Conetab must attend the Royal Court when it's a matter to do with a road being taken over or a road transaction. Now, I'm not sure if that's true. I suspect that actually we have procureurs in the parish who deal with the bien public, which is to do with the ownership of the parish, and we have a roads committee that deals with that. And I don't actually think it's necessarily correct that the Conetab must be present whenever a transaction happens in the Royal Court. So I suspect that the Conetab may be inadvertently misleading the House, and it would be good to have a lawyer in here. I said inadvertently, but I don't know. That's why we have an Attorney General, isn't it, to ask these kind of questions? Well, so
the proposer is not only the chairman of BBC, but also the president of the Comité de Conetab. In summing up, I'm sure he'll be in a position to answer from the understanding of the Conetab at least. It doesn't seem to me that a knowledge of what the strict legal position is likely to, because the proposal to excuse wasn't advanced on the basis of the strict legal position, as far as I understand it. It was simply advanced as to whether, given that the Conetab of St Peter is in the Royal Court, he should be excused. The interjection. I'm sorry, you've already spoken there.
So, if I may clarify it, the parish of St John's has recently passed contract within the last 2 months on a road, and I can assure you categorically that the constable and the procurers had to be present. I do know this, and I dislike my integrity being questioned.
Well, no, I'm sorry, as a matter of strict interpretation of what was said, there was no questioning of your integrity. The most that was said that what you said might have been inaccurate inadvertently. And so I don't think there's any imputation of your integrity. In my view, the matter should now be put to the vote, unless you would like to say some words in response.
Yes, I would, sir. Firstly, what a valuable way to spend our time in such a busy Sir, I am not a lawyer, but I can inform the Deputy and the States that the Connétable is required to attend the Royal Court on any property transactions, road extinguishments or whatever. The reason for that, sir, is that the Constable is a delegate of his parishioners, and a delegate cannot delegate to a third party to act on his behalf or on the parish's behalf at the Royal Court. It cannot give a power of attorney to anybody or to a lawyer or anybody else. It is, and I'm sure that if the Deputy wishes to check this out with his legal advisors, he will find that to be the case. And all of us constables who have been involved in property transactions on behalf of the parish will know this to be true. But the real point is that the constable is required to be in the Royal Court this morning. He needs to be in the Royal Court this morning, and therefore there's no question in my view that he should be excused for the relatively short time that he won't be in the Assembly. I maintain the proposition, sir.
Well, those in favour of excuse.
The appel, please.
The appel is called for. Ask the greffier to open the voting. Proposition is whether the Constable of St Peter should be defo excusé. If members have had the opportunity of voting, ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 38 votes pour, 3 votes contre, 1 abstention. Yes.
Votes contre, Deputy Southern Tadia Mezek, and the abstention, Deputy Higgins.
Very well.
So could we raise the defo on Deputy McClinton, please?
Yes, the defo is raised on Deputy McClinton. Cameron, I understand you'd like to discuss arrangements for future business, or at least warn people about future business.
Well, yes, sir. I think even the most optimistic among us will not think or believe that it will be possible for us to complete the business on the order paper today. Therefore, we need to think about a continuation day or days, sir. A number of members have approached me, and it has been suggested, well, A, we should continue tomorrow, or B, that we should continue next Tuesday. I would like members to think about this during the morning, and once again, so if just before lunch, I could make a proposition, which is likely to be at the moment, that we continue tomorrow in the hope of trying to complete the business today and tomorrow. But clearly, it's a matter for the States to decide, sir.
Very well, Chairman. Well, if members would then please consider that during the course of the morning, and then it's right, I think, that members decide just before lunch as to whether we continue tomorrow or next week. We now continue the debate on the Third Amendment, and does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Martin.
Yes, sir, I will be brief, and if we had finished last night, this speech wouldn't have happened, but there we go. What prompted me was the speech from the Minister of Economic Development. I think he went totally off script, because when I listened to the Minister for Social Security, she said that this is actually going to happen. And it might not be particularly in this way, but Deputy Southern is trying to do bring things forward in the way that doesn't go above the ceiling we already have. And when the Minister for Social Security spoke, she said a review would be done. It's a review a year too late, as the Deputy of St John has already told us. And we criticise all the time backbenchers who bring amendments to policymakers and the minister's decisions. But you must remember, they don't have the people behind them to do the research. So I think if there was much more closer working, if Deputy Southern was brought in and told maybe where this was going and how they would get there, it might have avoided it, or we still might be where we are today. But to bring out comments and then say, he didn't get this right, he hasn't thought of that, we haven't done this, is all very divisive. So I was really, really surprised with, as I say, with the speech of the Minister for Economic Development. We all want to grow the economy, and he says it's growing, but he says this is not, any form is going to hurt businesses. But it is going to happen. It's a council of ministers' decision, and last time I looked, he was on the council. So I do leave, it does leave open for someone else to speak to say where we are actually going, because that will decide whether I support this option, because I'm not always going to support Deputy Southern. I think he's on the right track, and I'm not convinced it is the right time. I'm not convinced that we do have the safeguards in train as the Social Security Minister wants, because you can't take money out when the money's not coming in. And I absolutely agree with that. So I will listen, but I want to know the truth. I want to know what I'm debating, and I will listen to, maybe if it's the Chief Minister's going to speak, to tell us what is the party line, or the council's line, sorry, sir. And then I will listen to the summing up before I decide. Sorry. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Call upon Deputy Southern to respond. I'm sorry, it hasn't shown at all, nor is your light shown. Very well. Yes, Deputy Higgins.
I only want to draw members' attention to something in the Council of Ministers' comments on this, which I find quite interesting. And I don't think that members are fully aware of the implications of what they're saying in their comments. Under the heading Economic Issues, they mention that in the first paragraph, that we need to remember that businesses do not pay tax. People do. This is an admission by the Council of Ministers that they've given up on getting any tax from companies. When they brought in 010, it meant that the only people paying tax are financial service companies, and not even all them, if you look at some of the questions or the answers to questions we've had over the last 2 sittings. And the only other companies who pay tax are utilities at 20%. So no companies in Jersey are paying tax. Now, they're saying then, so it's people who pay tax. Well, many of the companies are not paying tax at all. They're not, the states originally, or I should say the Council of Ministers originally, brought in the deemed distribution rules, which were, they were going to try and claw back a notional sum from the profits that they receive. Now, they were told right from the beginning in this chamber that there was no way they were going to get that past the European authorities. Why? Because it discriminated between firms in Jersey and firms outside. So the ones outside paid no tax, but Jersey firms would have to pay tax. That was ruled out of order by Europe, and when we're told by the Council of Ministers how successful they were in their negotiations and 010 was accepted, it was accepted less that deemed distribution, which meant that their tax revenue fell substantially. So that's the first point. And then they go on to say, one of the consequences of bringing in this increased contributions that Deputy Southern wants is that the cost of employing people would go up. And they're saying that employers could increase prices to offset the increase in costs. They've had such a bonus anyway, they're not paying any tax. It says reductions in the number of people employed to minimize the increase in employment costs. They've still had this big bonus. They're not going to cut down on the number of people that they have. They say it'll reduce dividends for shareholders, which could deter investment in the island. Everybody wants to invest in the island as a company because they pay no tax. So some of the things that they've actually mentioned in here, countering Deputy Southern's proposals, are totally bogus. So what I would say is, looking through both the proposals put forward by Deputy Southern and by the Council of Ministers, I think Deputy Southern is on the right track. And we've already heard last night at the very end, very ably put by the Deputy of St. John, that they've already been planning this. And in fact, this is what they're going to do over the next few months to try and get increased funds coming through. So in other words, they've used this measure in the past, which he gave examples of, and they're planning on doing it in the future. Why are they opposing Deputy Southern? Well, quite simply because it's Deputy Southern. You know, he's brought forward a proposal, he's put forward suggestions on how this situation can be dealt with and we can get rid of the health charge, but they don't want to vote for his proposition. In fact, they wouldn't want to vote for any backbencher's proposition because this Council of Ministers is so arrogant, they believe that anything that is not coming from their mouths is not worthy of any merit and shouldn't even be considered. And I would urge members to actually support Deputy Southern on this one because he's on the right lines. And even if he loses today, we'll see it probably in a year's time.
Does any other member wish to speak? Chief Minister.
So I'm pleased to follow Deputy Higgins and his comments on economic theory, but I don't want to correct him because I know that upsets him, sir. And I don't want to go into the some of the comments that he's just made about whether ministers accept backbenchers' proposals, because a number of proposals that members have brought to the MTFP, we have tried our best to find a middle way, and some we've been able to accept in that regard. I want to, however, just remind us of Deputy Masson's speech from yesterday afternoon. The Deputy of St John is, of course, right. There is within the MTFP a capping of the amount that the taxpayer puts into the Social Security Fund. What that means is that ultimately the break-even point, that is the point at which the contributions are going not only to meet current pensions and into the reserve, but will just get to the point where they're just meeting current pensions and no money will go into the reserve. So by capping supplementation, of course, you reach the break-even point earlier than you might otherwise have done. But what Deputy Masson alluded to, I'm not sure if he said it quite in these terms, is you can only use money once. What Deputy Southern is saying in his amendment, in its basic form, is that when Social Security undertake their review, and Deputy Southern does, I'm surprised, and I don't think he is claiming he doesn't know about that review, as Deputy Martin is indicating, because he is on the scrutiny panel, and I understand that the scrutiny panel have been made aware of the review. Now,
I am fully aware of the review and its details and the 10-point list of things to be investigated.
The Chief Minister is speaking. If you want to ask him to give way, to make a point of clarification, you can, and he can agree or he cannot, but you can't just interject.
And thank you, sir, that he's clarified that he's aware of the review. I don't want to give all the details of the review this morning, but I do feel that I'm having to touch just slightly on that area, sir, because the Social Security Fund, the way we deliver pensions, is something, I think it might have been the Deputy of St John that said there have been sensible, good long-term decisions made about that benefit and about that fund. The benefits there is the old age pension and sick pay. And good long-term decisions have been made about that. I think the Deputy of St John challenged us on capping supplementation. We've had a couple of changes to the way supplementation was calculated. It could be argued, and I don't demur from this, that actually those changes could have been seen as short-term changes around the long-term fund. I don't demur from that comment in this regard. But the simple fact is this, sir. That consultation will ask us as a community and us as legislators how we want in the future to deal with the ageing demographic, how we want to, if we want to use that reserve fund, which is something else that Social Security have managed incredibly well together with Treasury, and it's worked incredibly well. How we want to use that reserve fund, how we might want to ask people who, where, how they might want to pay a bit more to maintain the benefit, or whether they want to look at whether the benefits are appropriate going forward. That has got to be done in a way that takes the whole community with us. And we're often challenged for not taking people with us, and we don't want to go into that today because we'll be here for the rest of the month, rest of next month, sir, not just this month probably if we went into that subject. But the simple fact is this. You can only use those mechanisms once. And if members today decide, rather than the health charge being proposed by Council of Ministers and Treasury, they want to take the flexibility that's currently built into the social security system in order to do, I don't know if it was Deputy Southern or one of his colleagues talked about having a differential rate under the standard earnings limit to above the standard earnings limit, understanding where the cap should be on the social security contribution into the future. Is it still a third? That we've seen some slight small changes there. You can only use that once. And if we decide today that we're going to use it for the health charge, we then can't use that same money and those same contributions for the pension and for sick pay. I think we've just got to be absolutely clear about that. You can't use it twice. And I don't think, sir, that any member has got all the sufficient details to be able to make the decision to say they're going to take the flexibility from the old age pension, which is something that we guard and we can be proud of the decisions that those our forebearers have made in that regard, albeit they got challenged and criticised and vilified and at the time. Have we got the information to say, rather than the health charge that's being proposed, we're going to remove flexibility from being able to deal with the ageing demographic and the old age pension? And I can only answer that, sir, for myself, and the answer has to be no, we don't. That's what Deputy Southern is asking us in a nutshell. All the things that Senator Farnham said, I think, are correct, but in a nutshell, it's are we taking flexibility from the old age pension and tying the hands of social security, or are we going ahead with the charge as currently proposed, albeit some members I know don't like the charge as it's currently proposed. If you don't like the charge as it's currently proposed, I do not for a minute think that this, taking that flexibility from the pension scheme, from the social security scheme, is the right answer. And therefore, sir, I ask members to reject the amendment. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Senator McLeod.
Thank you, sir. The Chief Minister made a number of very good points there. Actually, I would pick up on the final word that he used, and that was flexibility. This is a word that I've used a lot in recent months, and indeed I was pleased to see that it came out in the Fiscal Policy Panel's annual report. They talked about the need for flexibility, and that's exactly why the Council of Ministers have come up with the package of measures that are contained within this medium-term financial plan. The Social Security Minister has had to make some very difficult decisions and has had to front some very difficult decisions in terms of changes within her remit. And she's fully supported by all the ministers and the Council of Ministers in what she's had to do. But we have to be clear here that although Senator, I was jumping the gun a bit, I nearly said Senator Southern over there, Deputy Southern. Although Deputy Southern has clearly thought carefully about his proposition, what he clearly has not done is consider the wider implications of the move. There are some errors within the proposition, the amendment that he has before members today. He talked, for example, about the 2% increase. In fact, there was a 2% increase introduced in 2012, very recently. So what he's proposing here with this amendment is a further 2% in 2018 and a further 2.5% in 2019. That's 6.5%. And this is an imposition on the business community. And one of the matters that the Council of Ministers had to balance and weigh up in putting this package and this MTFP together is getting that right balance to ensure that there isn't too much of a hit on any parts of our community, whether it's the business or whether it's private individuals, whatever their earning levels are. Difficult decisions, but nevertheless, we've sought to try and get that balance right. And that was one of the reasons why, and this was criticised by some, including the scrutiny, Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, in regard to distributional analysis. There were suggestions by them and other members that there hadn't been any work done considering the impact of the proposals, the overall proposals, and indeed there was. Ministers were considering right from the beginning some of the impacts that were going to result from decisions that were being made when bringing forward the package. And ultimately, towards the end, when the package was nearing completion, a distributional analysis was undertaken. And as a result of that, the plan itself was amended to take that result into consideration. So we do need to be very careful about the impacts here of this proposal that Deputy Southern is proposing. It will have, as my colleague, the Economic Development Minister, has already said yesterday, have an impact ultimately on jobs. Although Deputy Southern has reassured us that small earners will not be impacted, of course, there are businesses in areas like marketing, architects, digital tech, fledgling businesses, whose earnings will be impacted, and their ability to employ people when you're starting a business out. The SME sector, the small and medium-sized business sector in this island, is, and I've said this before, the lifeblood of any community, because it's local people who put their money and their time and their sweat into setting up and risking their funds and their money on developing these businesses. Laying additional costs on those individuals when they're trying to get those businesses up and running and sustained is something I think we need to avoid at all costs. Don't for 1 minute, sir, think that the Council of Ministers hadn't given due consideration to a similar proposal to the one brought forward by Deputy Southern. But it wasn't deemed to be the right time to be looking at such measures, or indeed at the scale at which he is proposing it. And that's why it was rejected. So I'd like to also pick up on some of the comments that Deputy Higgins made. He says he doesn't mind being criticised. And that's good, sir, because I'm just going to make a couple of points. I'm going to say that he was very clear in saying that the Council of Ministers has given up on taxing companies. So that is completely untrue. Companies are taxed. He did, to his credit, mention the fact that there are 10% and 20% charges. And there are, largely in the financial services area, utilities he talked about. But of course, it's been broadened out further than that in the mining sector, which also falls under the tax regime that's currently in place. But what he's missing out on, sir, is that the emphasis has changed and shifted to employees. So high-earning employees in particular are being hit. Shareholders, ultimately, local shareholders, are also being taxed, as we would expect. Now, there is an issue, and we are clear about that, and that is where we have non-locally owned companies where the shareholders are outside of the island. And we've been very clear about this for some time. Other jurisdictions have looked at this matter, such as the Isle of Man and indeed, more recently, Guernsey. And they've introduced measures, including what's dubbed the Tesco tax in the Isle of Man, looking at bringing in a broader section of businesses. Why was it called the Tesco tax? Because there happened to be a very large business of that name in the Isle of Man with a large turnover in the retail sector, and the Isle of Man adjusted their 0-10 structure to be able to generate some additional revenue. To be clear, in terms of the tax leakage for non-locally owned companies here in Jersey, where the shareholders are living outside of the island, is assessed to be in the region of £7 or £8 million. Now, let's be clear, that's £7 or £8 million that, as Treasury Minister, we would like to see available for paying towards and funding some of our key public services. And that's why we've started data collection from companies to understand to a greater extent what's going on within locally zero-rated companies, what shareholders are doing with money that perhaps to an extent is left within the company, but also allowing us to have the data to be able to consider measures such as those that have been introduced in the Isle of Man and in Guernsey. But until we have the data to be able to support any proposed change or possible change, to be clear, then of course we can't do it. So we haven't, Deputy Higgins, given up on taxing companies. Companies already make a considerable contribution to our revenues, and we are always looking at ways in which the system can be enhanced, and that will not stop. So there have been mentions during the debate that there are no plans for the ageing population. So that couldn't be more untrue. Of course there are plans. This is one of the issues that is at the very heart as far as the Council of Ministers are concerned, in terms of P82, the health strategy, long-term care scheme that was introduced, and of course the Social Security Fund, the I think it's about 1.4 billion that is in the fund currently. And it's there because we have planned, previous Social Security ministers have made difficult decisions to ensure that that fund is at a sufficient level to be able to provide what is necessary over the coming years. And the major review that Social Security have announced, which starts in October, is going to aim to ensure the long-term sustainability of that particular fund. So I was pleased that the Deputy of St John's spoke yesterday. She made some kind words about enjoying her time in Treasury. I would add, sir, that it was a pleasure having her in Treasury. But she made comments about the £20 million and Council of Ministers move. I think she was rather suggesting we were being a little naughty, perhaps, in the approach taken. But what I would say is that the contributions, the reduced contributions through the MTFP, which accounts for the 20 million over the plan period, is essentially a one-off measure. And it's using reserves. And of course the advice that we've had from the Fiscal Policy Panel is that we should be doing exactly that. When the economy is weaker, before it returns to capacity, we should be using our reserves. And that's exactly what this Council of Ministers is seeking to do. However, Deputy Southern over there is making a proposal which is not a short-term one-off measure. He's proposing something which is going to, in 2018, have an impact of around about 8.3 million and 16.8 million a year by 2019, forever, into the future. So there's nothing short-term about that. So we need to bear in mind that fact as well. So I would urge members to reject this proposal from Deputy Southern. It is in some respects attractive because it appears as if it's hitting businesses, the employee contribution, but the impact is going to be far wider in the SME sector. And we rarely do. At a time when the economy, there is a degree of uncertainty. We've seen the economy begin to recover last year. We've seen the latest GVA figures looking to be quite encouraging. We're still seeing some growth. But we do have risks ahead. We cannot afford to layer this level of additional cost into the economy at this particular point. So I would really strongly say to members, please reject this proposal from Deputy Southern. Thank you.
So could I have a point of clarification? May I seek
you're
of the Minister?
Seeking a point of clarification from the last speaker?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I think...
the Minister stated that there was possibly a £6 to £8 million leakage from the lack of corporate tax as a result of the change to 010. My understanding was that when GST was introduced, this was designed to plug that gap, and at the time a figure of 40 million was suggested. Could the Minister just clarify as to why he's suggesting 6 and 8? I've heard this figure said before, and it may well be correct, but my understanding of when 010 came into being and all corporate tax was lost...
I think this is getting perilously close to making
a speech
on the facts as opposed to asking for clarification.
Yes, sir. The figure of, I think I said 7 to 8 million actually, That sum is assessed as being the likely leakage with regard to shareholders that are not local. So they take the profits of a locally trading company, but the shareholders live outside of the island. It's purely that, it's quite narrow, and that's the reason it's that level and not a larger sum that the Deputy is referring to, which is, was the broader impact of the measures to 010, and those were largely plugged by GST, as he rightly says.
Sir, may I raise the défense de Connétable de Saint-Laurent, s'il vous plaît?
Yes.
Sir, and Senator Balash, please.
Yes, the defer is raised. Any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Call on Deputy Southern to respond.
Thank you, sir. And what a joy it is to be in again for a third day running, fourth day running. Okay, let's start with very, very good debate with many contributions. But let's start with the most recent, Senator McLean's, who criticises me for making errors and not accounting for the 2% that the Council of Ministers introduced back in 2014, maybe in 2012, that this extends. So that the fact is that the decision has been made by a Council of Ministers previously to raise the contributions to 2% on this particular sector, on employers, not employees, and those earning over £50,000 a year. Okay, nonetheless, he says, this is going to impact on the small and medium enterprise. No, it's not. It's employers whose employees earn greater than £50,000 or self-employed who also earn more than £50,000. This is not impacting on the small business sector. This is impacting on some fairly substantial earners. That's the reality. He also referred to the Tesco tax. We are making efforts to raise money from companies other than the 010 regime. I've looked at the Guernsey figures, and I think it raises at maximum £2 million. We're talking here about £15 million to cover what we refer as the health tax. And I remind members that what we're talking about overall is that a decade ago, business paid £400 million in tax. Individuals paid something like £80 million out of their own pockets. Over the past decade, deliberately, policy from the Council of Ministers has resulted in the reverse of that. Now it's £400 million from middle earners, individual tax, and it's around £80 million from companies. And that's one of the things we need to address. Certainly, in using the Chief Minister's words, in taking people with us, listen to the people out there who talk about where our taxes are. Listen to the middle earners who talk about how they've been hit in the last decade. And this tax is already, in its formula as devised by the Council of Ministers, is already unpopular. Listen to what the speeches were on the hustings at the recent by-election. Every member sitting there to be elected against the health tax as currently constituted, because it's an extra 1% on those who are already paying more. And let's go back to this so-called flexibility that we've got in dealing with the Social Security Fund. That 1%, the health tax, we've just been told by the Minister of Social Security, will be complemented by possibly, after the review, another 1%, another 2% for contributions into the Social Security Fund. So the reality is, even if we vote for this now, yes, there will be a review taking part, and sometime in the next 2 years or so, we'll be coming forward with a bare, basic choice for members of our society. and we'll be saying, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to raise contributions to Social Security to cover pensions and other benefits? Or do you want us to reduce pensions and other benefits? Or do you want us to do a mixture of both? That will be happening, whether we vote for this proposition, this amendment, or not. 2 years down the line, we're going to be faced with that choice. Because the reality is we can't afford to keep paying pensions from the Social Security Fund as at the current rate. We need to increase contributions or reduce payments. And that will be the stark choice. And that will happen whether we vote for this amendment or not. Sure as eggs is eggs, it's going to happen. And I listened very carefully to what the Social Security Minister and the Health Minister said yesterday, and I didn't hear anything that said, actually, this is the wrong move. Because what they were saying was, actually, it's something that's under consideration by ourselves anyway. You happen to have got there first and said, let's use it for the health tax. We might have used it in other ways, but we're going there. That's going to happen. What I did hear yesterday, very clearly, was that somehow the proposal I've formulated somehow damages the HIF fund and the Social Security Fund itself. The Deputy of St John dealt absolutely clearly with that yesterday. She says, in fact, what we've done with the Social Security Fund is we've capped the supplementation artificially. And what's that effectively? Effectively, that's saying, here's our fund, it's coming to a critical tipping point. What have we done with it? We've borrowed £20 million from it. It's closer to the tipping point than ever because of our short-term measures, because we need that money now. That's effectively what we've done. We've borrowed from that hypothecated fund to keep going. Ditto with the Health Insurance Fund. Raising these new charges from employers does not damage the Health Insurance Fund one jot. It doesn't take away what the contribution already is that goes into the Health Insurance Fund at all. What has the Council of Ministers done? Why? In order to prop themselves up and limit the tax raising to £15 million for health tax, they've taken £5 million for each of 3 years, £15 million in total, out of the Health Insurance Fund in order to prop up spending in terms of the medium-term financial plan. So far from this being a risk, my amendment being a risk to the HIF Fund and the Social Security Fund, the ministers themselves, with their short-term Billy Bodgett approach, short-termism, let's borrow from the HIF Fund, let's borrow from the Social Security Fund for the moment, that will get us through, and I'm accused of producing something long-term. Yes, I should hope so, because I think we've had enough of Billy Bodgett mechanisms to cope with the short-term. The other criticism I heard was from the Economic Development Minister, who suggested there was some confusion between me and my colleague, 2 seats away, Deputy Mezek, because he wants to challenge the tail in the proposed health charge, the protection for the really wealthy and the really high earners. And I haven't dealt with that. I haven't dealt with that because that would make it too complex to organise and draft. There was a lot of time and effort spent in drafting this particular amendment, get it right. It wasn't possible. It just became simply too complex to also address this protection for the really high earners. So that is yet to be debated. It'll be debated as Amendment 8, I believe. So that's separate and would add a further £2.2 million to what we're gathering today. So, a great deal of sound, but not a great deal of content, I don't think, from the Council of Ministers. Don't do this now, because we're going to do it later. We've done something similar in the past when we chose to raise £7.5 million, but don't do it now to raise £15 million for the health charge. The health charge, unpopular already, adds 1% to the middle earners, and they know it, and will be supplemented by further rises in social security contributions, I am sure, as night follows day, sooner or later in the next 2 to 3 years. That will happen. No wonder they don't. But don't do what basically Deputy Southern, a mere backbencher, suggests, even though it's a perfectly sensible thing to do and actually produces the £15 million that we need in order to cover the health tax in what I believe, taking the people with us, that people will understand that this is also an attempt to get a little more contribution out of particularly high-earning employers, high-value employers. And that's the reality of what will happen. I maintain the amendment, sir, and call for the passage.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats.
Sorry, sir, could we raise the defo on Senator Oza? Thank you.
Yes, the defo is raised on Senator Joseph. Members to return to their seats. Ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been rejected. 11 votes pour, 30 votes contre, 2 abstentions.
11 voting pour. Constables of St Saviour and St John, Deputy Martin, Southern, Deputy Greville, Deputy Hilton, Tadier, Higgins, Masson, Mezek and MacDonald, and the abstentions, Deputies Lafondre and the Deputy of St John.
So could I ask the others too, so we know who have rejected this but will be bringing it back later?
Those voting contre, Senators Rutier, Osoph, McLean, Gort, Farnan, Banash, Green, Constables of St Helier, St Clement, St Lawrence, St Mary, St Wannes, St Brelard and St Martin, Deputy Trinity, Deputies Noel, Pennell, Deputy St Martin, Deputy Bryans, Deputy St Peter, Deputy Rondell, Andrew Lewis, Deputy St Juan, Deputy Labby, Wickenden Bree, Norton, Deputy St Mary, Deputy Truscott and McClinton.
Very well. We now come on to amendment number 6. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph A1. To agree in principle that in respect of public sector employees earning more than the average annual salary, as calculated by the Jersey Statistics Unit, the employer rate in respect of PECA's PEP should be reduced by 1% per annum, and the employee rate increased by 1% per annum, until such time that the employer rate and the employee rate are equal, it being assumed that any adjustment that is less than 1% necessary to achieve final equalisation should be implemented in the final year of adjustment. Requesting the Minister for Treasury and Resources accordingly to bring forward the necessary legislation, if any, to give effect to this change for debate in the State Assembly, and in consequence thereof, after the words as set out in Summary Table B, insert words, except that the allocation of resources to each State's Department, a non-ministerial States-funded body, shall be reduced in 2019 by the amount specified in Table 1 in the report accompanying this proposition. Page 2, paragraph A2. For the words as set out in Summary Table C, insert the words, except for the addition of £1,475,000 in 2019.
David.
Thank you, sir. So I don't particularly expect this to be a long debate, but in my view it's something that does need airing, and I also know this is not a welcome proposition amongst certain quarters. We are facing increased financial pressure. Let's be clear, even since the MTFP was lodged, our projected annual income in 2020 will fall by a further £9 million a year. To cover this, we're going to take a further £16 million out of the strategic reserve. We're going to be using our capital reserves ultimately to fund revenue expenditure. We are in a period of uncertainty. Yes, there could be upsides, but prudence dictates not to bank on those until they've happened and we know that they are sustainable. We have various charges and revenue-raising measures coming in. We still do not know full impact. Perhaps, hopefully, from the Chief Minister, I'll receive an answer to my written questions at some point. I think he said they were somewhere in his office and had been a glitch. But at present, we have no idea how these charges sit in the context of all the other things that have changed in the last few years, and by how much Middle Jersey now carries the burden. Within that lot, the Council of Ministers are looking eventually to tax, if you're a taxpayer, us twice for using the toilet. Why do I say that? And as I've said it before, taxation is about the provision of services that government provides. Processing of human waste, i.e. sewage, and solid waste have got to be some of the most basic services we already pay for. Yet, despite all the talk of savings and efficiencies, we continue to have a very generous pension scheme. Not just a good scheme, but a magnificently generous scheme. Now, just to illustrate that, for example, and this is obviously in the public domain because it's from the accounts, the Chief Executive of the States has a pension pot which has a transfer value of just over £2,500,000, according to the accounts. I've always understood that employer contributions are not treated as a benefit in kind, even above a certain level, and are therefore not taxable. I'd be happy to be incorrect on that. I emphasise nobody has done anything wrong here, but this pot of money will likely have had a significant contribution paid into it by ultimately the taxpayer. The increase in transfer value was around £140,000 for 2015 alone, according to the accounts. Now, in the UK, more recently, there have been caps placed as follows, and I hasten to add I'm doing a very high-level thing. This is straight off the Inland Revenue website. If your pension pots go above, amongst other things, £40,000 a year, and £1 million in one's lifetime, above which you'll be taxed. And I put that into context, and I'm not a great fan of looking at the UK in terms of our taxation system, but given that the justification of the waste charge is that many other jurisdictions do this, I trust that perhaps for this budget or the next budget, we might start looking at these kind of areas of effectively excess. And I mention all of this because it's not something that gets particularly aired, and I think that given the redundancies, the stealth tax that are being introduced, it does seem to me this would be an area that's worth looking at. Now let's come to the pension scheme itself. The employer rate, i.e. what we, as the employer, ultimately, and the taxpayer, are paying into the pension scheme, will be increasing to 16% and potentially 16.5%. And it just happened that when we as a panel looked at the regulations last year, we identified that the average contribution rate for employers in the private sector was 10%. So we're paying above the odds to the tune of around 6%. We are therefore subsidising the public sector pension scheme well above what employers in the private sector scheme, as private sector, would pay. And just before I continue, I really should thank the Council of Ministers for further inspiring me on this matter. To quote the MTFP, in some areas, it is appropriate that a user of a particular service pays for that service rather than being subsidised by the taxpayer. That's the justification that's coming through, for example, from waste charges and certain other areas. So at a time that the ministers are seeking me to tax me twice for going to the toilet, ultimately through a waste charge, I think we need to start sending a message that these kind of areas need to be addressed. Now, ministers will say, well, we've just done that. They say it's unfair that we should go back to employees so quickly. J&G have written in, etc., etc. Let's address some of these. I was actually very briefly involved with the J&G, the Joint Negotiating Group, at one point, and there are many excellent people on it. It represents the employees, i.e. public sector workers, and there's some of their representatives on it, and on the other side, the employer, also civil servants. So fairly obviously, none of them are going to be particularly keen to see their pensions affected. So I'm not surprised they don't support this amendment. And I was actually reminded of some other remarks that get made. One of Senator Green's favourite homilies: if you keep doing things the same way, you will end up with the same result. And this is the problem. Even in the last month, the financial forecasts have changed, financial pressures have increased, and actually, under this, we're refusing to even look at this area. We would have to change the laws or regulations, we'd have to go back and negotiate. Every reason for not doing something, we must be a good employer. Yeah, Contrast that with the nursery education funding debacle. No consultation, certainly no negotiation. This was imposed from above, so why did we treat third-party organisations with less respect? And bearing in mind, what I'm proposing is 2 years away. Contrast that with, I think it was the teachers' debate yesterday, isn't it? We're putting it into the plan and then we're going to go away and negotiate. That's effectively what I'm saying, in principle. Now, please note, on the proposition, I actually take the money and I put it into contingency. I've specifically allowed for the minister to be able to go to the negotiating table, and if he needs the money for an extra year, then it's there. But this would encourage the ministers so that they can start negotiating. Now, we're not living in Aspic, although it may sometimes feel like it. We are not immune from the financial storms that are buffeting the globe. What is the justification for saying to the employees, actually, we need to come back and talk again? Well, things have changed. Greater financial pressure is the answer. In reality, what we're saying is that we want you, the employee, to save more into your pension pot because we cannot actually afford to continue to do so to the level that we presently do. This will still be a generous scheme, just slightly less magnificent. It requires the employee to put aside more of their own money into what is a very generous scheme, rather than the taxpayer subsidising the scheme to such a massive extent. And please note, this is only for employees earning above average annual salary. So the lower earners would be fully protected. Now, the comments from the Council of Ministers include the following. The employee contributions are already increasing to an average of 8% of earnings. Absolutely true. And, just to be fair, good set. That's higher than the average employee contribution in the private sector in the Channel Islands, 5%. Well, I would be delighted if the Council of Ministers wanted to match the private sector rates for both the employer and the employee. That would be brilliant. Let's take them down to 5 and 10%. But I think there'd be one slight, tiniest flaw in that approach. And basically, very, very simplistically, I think the scheme would eventually go bust. Because there wouldn't be enough money going into the scheme at all. And perhaps that identifies the other problem, also identified by scrutiny advisors, who raised concerns about the long-term affordability of the contributions in place. So the comments also make remarks about not being able to make comparisons just on this level due to the private sector getting bonuses and various other perks. And that's why I wanted, this argument does get thrown around occasionally, and I wanted just to people to look at this particular graph which was sent around. Very, very simple, and it's actually something that was done. It was done for a corporate services panel. I can't remember exactly when, or when the first time round, and it was recently updated for another purpose. And what that basically shows, I would hope people understand, is that the red bar is, broadly speaking, average earnings in the public sector. The blue bar is the average earnings in the private sector, and one will see that there is a significant difference there, and the green bar is the difference. And although in the last 3 years, I think actually it clearly demonstrates the dilemma. And whilst this is averaged, it clearly shows there's a massive differential between the private sector and the public sector, and that whilst there's a fractional narrowing in the last 2 or 3 years, there is quite a large difference. Obviously, quite a lot of that difference is due to pensions. So, at a time when we're imposing further charges on Middle Jersey and also on lower earners, at a time when the healthcare charge is capped, and at a time when taxpayers will be taxed twice for going to the toilet, can I seriously look into a constituent side and say, yes, I can justify all of these costs to you, and yes, I can justify these high pension schemes? Answer, of course, I cannot. So the world of pensions continues to change. We have improved matters, but there is further to go. But I wanted to highlight this to members as an area to me, because for me, it's an area which still needs addressing. And I fully expect to get a lot of flack flying in my direction in about 4 minutes' time, I would suggest. The proposition does actually 2 things. Firstly, it gradually reduces the employer rate by 1%, and it gradually increases the employee rate by 1% until they are equal. And that would be roughly at 12%, and would take approximately 4 years. It would eventually save approximately £6.3 million per year. And over the period of those 4 years, because they're graduating up, that would be about £15.5 million over that period. So we are not talking particularly small sums. It does not affect lower earners. It does not affect teachers because they are in a different scheme and for which the employer rate contribution rate is lower. And there are some complexities involved in there. There is flexibility in this. In other words, if the timing doesn't work and the negotiations don't work, the Minister would still be able to transfer the money out of contingency and back to the departments if needed if negotiations took longer. As I said, I fully expect to get a lot of flack coming my direction on this amendment. I wanted to highlight it to people because for me, in the longer term, it's an issue that will continue to need to be addressed. The sooner one starts flagging it up, the possibility of moving things forward, and actually it's the usual thing. The earlier you start planning on these type of things, the easier they are to implement, even if you have to do it in 5 years' time, rather than waiting to 2020 and saying, by the way, we've got a problem. So this is a very hard and a difficult decision. But as custodians of the public purse, this needs to be looked at. I'm sure the next few moments we'll have some very interesting comments against this, but I reiterate, can I look my constituents in the eye at the time we're introducing all of these charges and when the burden of the state upon them is increasing? Can I look them in the eye and justify this? I can't, and I think it's a matter for members to consider, and I thought it was an appropriate place to bring it into the MTFP because it is actually, ultimately, about taxpayers' money. Thank you, sir.
Point of clarification, if I may, sir.
I beg your pardon?
Could I have a point of clarification?
Well, we need to have the proposition seconded before we can have a point of clarification.
Too quick for my own good.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Then do you have a point of clarification from the speech?
Please, yes.
Speaker?
When the proposer refers to 10% rate of an average of 10% rate amongst employers, is he talking about an average of all employers or an average of those employers with a workplace pension scheme?
The short answer, sir, is it was a survey done based on 85 employers across the Channel Islands. I can't give you the detail on that without going back and checking, and we'll try to do that before the end of the debate. My understanding, it will have been employers with pension schemes. So, I mean, I think the concern would be is if it's employers who didn't include pension schemes, would that bring the rate lower? Point is, it is an average across the private sector.
Well.
And sorry, so there will be fluctuations, absolutely, because I can say my employer scheme when I was involved in one was about 5%. I'm aware of people who don't have one. I'm aware there are some very old ones and probably no longer functioning which have higher rates. But overall, the trend, 10% is not an unreasonable rate and seems to be a reasonable rate for a good employer these days.
Very well. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Constable St Martin?
Thank you, sir.
I beg your pardon. In fact, I had the light from the Senator Green first, Constable, so I'll call upon you next, if I may.
Thank you, sir. And I wouldn't want to disappoint my dear friend, the Deputy Lafondre, sir, because I am going to throw a bit of friendly advice and flack to the Deputy, sir. So in opposing Deputy Lafondre's amendment, my comments are heavily influenced by my experience and role as Deputy Chairman of the State's Employment Board. And so I do feel distinctly uneasy with the Deputy's suggestion at this time. And he did say that I would say some of this. So the contributions of some members have recently been revised, and the pension scheme has already put up contributions both for the employer and the employee. I stress recently revised, sir, and I do agree with the Deputy on one thing, sir. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. But we're not doing what we've always done. We've changed from a final salary scheme, sir, to a career average scheme. And more on that later. So I stress recently changed, recently revised, because it was less than a year ago. Only November last year, this Assembly approved the regulations that set out changing from a final salary to a career average. And that included, very clearly, the contribution rates, and it was almost unanimous, sir, in this Assembly. So the scheme has been operating now for new entrants since January the 1st. These regulations, as I say, were put for approval, and they weren't just dreamt up, sir. They were years of negotiation with the Committee of Management, and of course the Committee of Management wanted to get the best deal that they could get for their people they were representing. That's natural. We were, from the States Employment Board, trying to get the best deal for the public. That's right. But it was years of negotiation, not something that took place with a couple of memos and emails, sir. There was close scrutiny. It was negotiated with the joint negotiating group. So, and it's my understanding, sir, that unlike Guernsey and United Kingdom, that the negotiations here, I know the negotiations here, largely avoided animosity and recourse to legal action, which were all part of the scene in both the UK and in Guernsey. So I'm very concerned that the changes that the Deputy proposes to such a core aspect of the scheme, who pays what, and I'll come back to that in a minute, would mean that we would have to go back to negotiate a settlement again. Years of work, sir. And I don't think it would be very easy to do. So the perception from our employees, and I think that's been borne out in the letter that they sent us, would be that an agreement so recently negotiated in good faith could be overturned for reasons that were never previously raised before, although from our side we had opportunities to do so if we had wanted to. Let us not forget that the employee contribution rates are already scheduled to rise from 5% to nearly 8%, and a further rise to an average of 12% would surely be resisted. On a practical level, I'm concerned that the effect in the increase of contribution rates might have on the ability to recruit and retain staff. And so those affected by this amendment are nurses, social workers, doctors, consultants, technician manual workers, paramedics, physios and childcare officers. Just as an example, I just went through the rates of pay for those ones that I could easily lay my hands on. All of those will be affected, sir. Further increasing the contribution above the increase already agreed for large sections of the public sector, I would suggest would do little to raise the morale for the states. So we have a responsibility to be fair to our employees. They do a very good job in challenging circumstances. I'm a little bit concerned here with the comments that the Deputy made about comparing us to the private sector, that we're having a little pop at the public sector here, and I'm not happy about that, sir. Remember that pension is nothing more than a deferred payment. So the private sector, when the Deputy was looking at their pension, did he also look at their bonuses and their medical expenses and the cars that they get as well, in taking that into consideration, none of which our staff get, sir? A pension is a deferred payment, nothing more, nothing less, something we've negotiated with them, and I ask members to reject this and outright, sir, and hopefully we won't spend too long on it.
Colin Thompson, Martin.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to follow on from Senator Green, my colleague, who said it probably a lot better than I could have said it. The Deputy makes some very good points in the amendment, and I would suspect that every member has a degree of understanding in the suggestions that he makes, and I'm sure some of the public will as well. And after all, it's states members who seem to be continually criticised, especially the Council of Ministers. It also seems that many civil servants and senior manual workers that on the public payroll that receive similar criticism continually. This is basically asking, as we know, the state employees to pay the additional 1% of their wages as an increased pension contribution for what is seen as the good, and as the Deputy said, subsidised scheme, better compared to private schemes, and reducing the amount the employer, the states, pay by 1% and continuing with that increase. I'd like to remind members that I'm a member of the States Employment Board. And whilst accepting that some states' employers may have issues with the States Employment Board at the moment, we are trying to work together on a whole range of issues. There will be members of the public who are not employed by the states. Those working in the private sector will be quite happy to see the states' employees, as has been said, to pay extra. But as the Senator has said, we've not long since made changes to the pension schemes contribution for states' employers, where new staff pay 3% more than the existing staff, and the existing staff likely to pay a further 3% from 2019. The new staff are actually paying that now. We committed to fix the contribution rate until 2023 and now seek to change that commitment. The 2015-16 pay negotiation has not yet been resolved, and I think it's unlikely to be resolved to the satisfaction of all our staff. The 2017 negotiations are likely to be further see members of states employers unhappy, and further increases or further pay negotiations are likely to be difficult as well. We're working with our states employees regarding workforce modernisation. We're looking at staff grades at the moment within the public sector workforce, and this is a time of possible redundancies. The Deputy is not detached and actually refers to that in page 4 of his proposition, in his amendment. And now we'd like to tell the staff that we'd like them to pay an additional 1% from 2019, and that is going to continue to rise until the employer-employee rates are equalled. Even accepting the Deputy has suggested that it would only apply to those on the above the average annual salary, I'm unable to support the move. And I'm sure there are other people who are probably on the average or below that might think it could come to them as well in due course. Stepping back from my role on the States Employment Board, I feel very uncomfortable as a States member to tell our hard-working States employees, not only those earning above the average salary, but all of them, that we can consult with you, that we can agree to do deals with you, we can make promises to you, we can create the legislation to support that agreement, and within 12 months, and after 18 months or more of negotiation, we will seek to change those agreements. Is that what they expect of a good employer? I don't think so. I think it would be morally wrong to renege on an agreement, and it's not the way I work or I've ever worked before, sir. So that, for that reason, I won't be supporting the Deputy's amendment, and I ask other members to reject it. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Sutherland?
Sir, and the Deputy understands full well that I won't agree with one iota of what he proposes. But just briefly, sir, as I mentioned before, an average is a moving feast. If you don't, it's an average of what? We definitely need clarification on that. But that wouldn't affect whether I vote against or for this proposition. The Deputy appears to be concerned to target only the high earners, and he might expect some support from me in that. But I've got news for him. You've got a mechanism for targeting high earners if you think they're earning too much. It's called taxation. It's not called messing around with their pensions. And it's not called messing around with their pensions when they've just spent at least 2 years in careful, painstaking, pin-fiddly negotiations about what we can afford, what's sustainable, and what is possible, and what's sensible. And that's happened in recent times, and we shouldn't be going anywhere near steamrolling that and saying that painstaking agreement doesn't count for anything because the states have just ordered us to do this. That shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening with newly qualified teachers' pay. It shouldn't be happening with pensions. It's a no-no from the very beginning.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Conor St John.
Thank you, sir. When you look at this graph, I think it's fairly obvious that there is a disparity between the private and the public sector. This graph shows that the public sector have significantly higher wages than the private sector as an average across everything. It would be wrong to continue that discrepancy, and it would be wrong to continue a pension that is equally disparable. All that the proposer is trying to do is to put a marker in the sand that in the future we are going to have to examine this position, and we are going to have to reduce pensions because it is unsustainable. Public finances are changing. Costs are rising. Priorities are changing. We need to invest, as we've been drummed into us by the Chief Minister and the Council of Ministers, we need to invest in education and in health. And that money is prioritised in other areas, and we need to constantly examine. So this is putting a marker down that things do need to change, that pressures are changing, priorities are changing, and I would urge members to support this proposition. Before I sit down, sir, could I also raise the defo on Senator Ferguson?
Defo is raised on Senator Ferguson. Senator Ferguson.
Thank you. It's nice to be seen, sir. Yes, Senator Green makes all sorts of comments about benefits in the private sector. I've actually worked in both the private and the public sector, so I do know a bit about these. These do not exist in total for many workers in the private sector. You know, he's saying that they don't exist for workers in the public sector. As I say, not all workers in the private sector get these bonuses, and in fact I know a number of people in the private sector who haven't actually had a salary increase for 5 or 6 years. The benefit for public sector workers has usually been the job security, and the average salary, though, has now risen to just a little less than that of the private sector. So it is unbalanced, and I think the Deputy is absolutely right to highlight this for people.
Excuse me, sir. I wonder if the Senator would give way a moment. Regretfully, I think we are in quorum.
Ah, thank you. You've made just Yes, we are in chorus. I'm sorry you'll have to pause there, Senator. Usher, could you invite some members to return to the... Thank you, Conchab. Very well, Senator. We're now quorate again. Please continue.
Yep. I was actually saying that the real benefit for public sector workers has been the job security. And as I say, the average salary, there have been studies over the last 10 years, 12 years to my knowledge, that have shown that the salaries of the lower end of the scale in the public sector are in fact higher than equivalent posts in the private sector. So the reform that is going on and the wages reorganisation is very welcome. However, I think this amendment of the Deputy Le Fondre does highlight the fact that pensions, as I agree, are an important part of salary, but they also need looking at. I understand there were changes made at the end of last year, but I don't think these particular changes, aimed at as they are at the higher rate of taxes, earnings, will actually make much effect, will affect the general feelings of the workforce. It could be said, in fact, that it is only fair to increase the contribution for the higher paid workers, because in actual fact, the lower paid workers are subsidising their pensions. So, and the taxpayer underlying it is subsidising the lot. So I think this is a very worthwhile amendment and I support it, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Joseph.
Thank you, sir. The mover of the proposition makes in his opening remarks a series of widespread, broad attacks on the Council of Ministers' policies, which I won't attempt to respond to in detail. Suffice it to say that these are the characteristics and the repeated comments that effectively downgraded income forecasts means that we're in difficulty. More money from reserves means that we're in difficulty. Criticises the Council of Ministers for not making enough savings. Criticises the fact that we are investing in infrastructure. Speaks about a toilet tax and charging people twice. The words that he uses, charging people twice to use a toilet. And he says, effectively, everything is in a mess, everything is wrong, or most of it at least. The past Treasury was certainly wrong in their income forecasts. The current one appears no better than the last one. And we need to send a strong message to this past and present Council of Ministers that they need to sort their house in order. See, these comments don't need to be challenged in any sense of taking much of this Assembly's time now, because we will come to some major debates later. But it is worth just challenging one or two of them. And let us first of all say, if I will say, I'll summarise 3 points. First of all, we have a public sector pension scheme, unlike that of the United Kingdom and most other countries, that has a fund that contributions have been put into. If I may ask the Deputy with respect not to simply pluck out figures of one individual's pension pot because that person has worked and this Assembly has passed regulations to put a pension pot for employees in. Any individual, even Sir you, I think any senior civil servant or Crown officer, information about their pension pot could be made. Could be, of course, said that in a post-Brexit situation that the pension amounts of money within PCRS have seen a Brexit bounce, certainly because of the wise and prudent investment strategies that have been pursued by the Treasury and their advisors on all our public investments. Indeed, it's worth also, in the same breath, as he says, oh, this Council of Ministers is failing and we are taking money out of our reserves, it may just be also worth saying to members, of course, that some of those reserves may have already been covered by the increased returns, as has been done in recent years, because of the prudence of this Assembly in actually having reserves, unlike other places who have mountains of debt. The characteristic that is put across, the portrayal that Deputy Le Fondre makes, which is, of course, it seems to me, it's interesting. I was pleased to hear there are certainly, everybody in this Assembly is not part of a political party, or most of us are not, but certainly one can characterise, and we do need to position certain speeches as to where they're coming from economically. The economic right and the economic left, that's something perfectly legitimate. We've seen here a speech of somebody on certainly the right of the economic situation. And we're seeing, actually, I think, the economic left also actually opposing what the economic right are doing. In other debates, we're going to see them coming together and giving the centre a good kicking. So some realism is needed. Some real politics is needed. Some time wasting and some facts are needed about the reality of where we are. We are not in this dreadful situation that requires such propositions to change carefully negotiated pension schemes that actually exist, as opposed to pension arrangements in the United Kingdom and other governments to come out of tax revenue. Yes, that's tax revenue. Pension and civil service pay comes from tax revenues in the UK. There is no fund. And we're talking about the percentage that is made on funds. So we want to criticise, don't we? Some want to criticise some civil servants, saying that they have gold-plated pensions, that somehow they are that they're sitting behind their desks with their feet up, waiting for their golden pensions. So it's not like that at all. The deputy may remonstrate, but that is what he is saying. There has been he is indicating that effectively we should be making some civil servants pay more, and we think about the comparisons of actually what we need, which are a good public sector workforce that are paid properly, that are receiving proper pensions, which are prudent and properly made for and properly provided for in a fund, which doesn't create a huge liability for the states and the people of Jersey in the longer term, which they do not. Many of the remarks that he and others have made in the past about the ballooning deficit in the public sector pensions, I would challenge, and I would suggest that such proposition must not be approved. It would be unwise to approve such propositions without evidence and without negotiation. We will come back to, in later debates, if the Deputy wants to bring some of these, and this is one of a series, this is one of a start of a number of propositions, I say to the Deputy, if he wants to start his proposals, of which this is one, by broadsides against everything that's wrong, I don't want to take this Assembly's time up, but I will say the opposite of what the actual economic situation is, and where we are standing in truth with empirical evidence of how well we're doing. This is not the right approach. It is not right to characterise everything that is wrong. It is not right to say doom and gloom and to engage in project fear. It is not right. I want realistic and true, accurate, latest information before members to make information, not just emotion and fear. And I urge members to vote against an unthinking and unwise proposition.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Chief Minister.
So sometimes it's difficult to know where to start with an amendment. And I say this in regard to this particular amendment because I think during the move of the amendment, the Deputy recognised that the changes that had been carefully negotiated and made during the last government, changes that were brought to this Assembly, changes that were put in legislation, were the right thing to do. Because it seems to me his underlying concern was about a final salary scheme and contributions not meeting the pension, and he's also concerned about comparison with the private sector. And perhaps we'll come back to that final comparison, because that is somewhat of a subjective issue. The government and this Assembly have, through negotiation, asked members of the scheme to move from a final salary scheme to a career average scheme. That is a great improvement. So let us not pretend and go out to the public again with the insinuation that there is a gold-plated scheme, that government has done nothing about it, that employees haven't understood that the scheme needs to change, because they have. They absolutely have. And sir, I congratulate those employees who were involved on the joint negotiating group. They were a fine example of what it means to serve the public. Because the government and this assembly asked them to contribute more. To contribute more for a reduced benefit. Because the scheme that was in place could not continue. And I congratulate them, sir, because they recognised and they understood that the scheme had to change. Of course, there was a lot of negotiation about the level of benefits, the accrual rates, and that's right, that's how it should be. But the fundamental underlying principle that we were going to ask them to contribute more for a reduced benefit, they accepted. And they worked within a framework and those parameters. So I'm afraid that this amendment would undo all that good work, and it actually casts in an unfortunate way that our employees are not aware of the need to have changed and are not aware of the way that pensions are moving. That's the reverse. They are, they have done, and they've worked with us to take action. That action, sir, as members will see from the comments, is that non-uniform services will be paying an extra 3% in contribution. An extra 3% in contribution for a reduced benefit. Uniform services will be paying even more for a reduced benefit.
I ask a point of clarification, sir, from the Chief Minister. As he refers to uniform services, could you just clarify what the employer contribution rate is on uniform services, please?
Are you able to give that point of clarification?
So I don't have it with me. I think the Deputy already knows it, sir, because I think it was either in his opening speech or it's in his amendment. But that does not detract from the fact that we are asking them to pay considerably more. As part of those negotiations, we looked elsewhere in the world, and one policy being adopted by other places, some of those other places not so far away, is that they were proposing changes to their pension scheme that would have meant it wasn't fully funded. Only funding up to 60, between, I think, about 60% funded. We could have made that choice, sir. You probably didn't realise we were thinking about your pension in this way, sir. We could have made that choice. That would have reduced the contribution rates in the manner that the Deputy is now asking us to do. We could have said, well, we don't think that it's right that the employer also has to pay more, so we'll just muddle on for a few more years and have it partially funded. And by the way, that muddling on would mean we'd just be leaving it for another 5 years to sort it out and to change it and to deal with any deficit. That's not responsible, sir. That is not responsible, and I would have no part of it. But it would have been easier. Would have been far easier, sir. Because it would have meant we wouldn't have had to reprioritise, reorganise, change the way that we're spending. But it wouldn't have been right, sir. It would have been a short-term solution. And that's what this would be, sir. It's attractive because it chimes with a certain belief, sir, that employees in the public sector somehow are just sitting around and not pulling their weight and getting fantastic salaries and great pensions. It chimes with that belief, sir. And I know that that is not what the mover of the proposition thinks. I know that, sir. But I'm afraid his amendment chimes with that view of the world. Perhaps picking up on some of the things that Senator Oziff said, that some members of this Assembly have accused the MTFP of being a slash and burn, reducing expenditure, cuts right, left and centre. And yet, sir, the chairman in his presentation to members earlier this week was complaining that the spend in 2019 was still greater than he would have liked to have seen. And we'll come on to that, no doubt, in the next amendment. So I'm not sure whether the chairman's going to be moving that or one of his colleagues. But the truth is, sir, this MTFP, despite all the boo-ha, or ha-boo,
I'm not trying to find either of those terms,
is, I'm being corrected with Yarbu over here, does make some difficult decisions about reprioritising spending. Does try and stop the growth in government at the same rate that we've seen in the past. Does invest in strategic priorities and important challenges that this community faces. And it does it in a balanced way. And that's why, sir, we find ourselves on the one hand being accused of being uncaring, austerity, and yet on the other we're being told that we're not doing enough, that we should be cutting more, that we should be slashing pension contributions. I ask members to consider where the balance lies. It wasn't easy to deliver the changes that have been delivered. In fact, there's one employee group who are still arguing with us about it, despite the legislation. But believe me, sir, they're not arguing because they'd like us to ask them to contribute more. I'll let you into a secret, sir. It's the reverse. There has to be balance. We have to try and make decisions for pensions over the medium-ish term. And I look to Deputy Bree because we had a conversation only last week about what was short, medium and longer term. The medium term of between 10 and 15 years in this regard. And that's what we did when we made these pension changes. There may need to be changes in the future, but an amendment on the back of the MTFP saying we're going to equalise the contributions between employees and employers is not the right approach, as attractive as it might appear to some members. It's not the right approach for all the reasons I've given. It's not the right approach because it's not a fair way to deal with employees. And it's not a right approach because actually it would just put pressure, I say even more pressure, on pay restraint and delivering the restraint that the MTFP asks of us to deliver as well. Let us send a message, sir, to our employees that we are grateful that they engaged with us in changing the pension. That we are grateful that they accepted the need to contribute more for reduced benefits. And we're not just going to suddenly change our mind. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. We've heard from the right, we've heard from the even more right, and so let's maybe hear some more from the Social Democratic Centre, where politics is happening across the world these days. Members might laugh, and it's often easy when you live in a bubble like the States Assembly as politicians to get a misrepresentative idea of where the centre lies. What I see from international politics and national politics is that things like the living wage, proper maternity and paternity leave, affordable housing, and even rent control, dare we even listen to things like that in Jersey, are not considered to be extreme left propositions, but actually they're things that even the right-wing parties, the centre-right, even in the UK are proposing, and the UK have got their own living wage now, which was brought in not by a socialist government, not even by a Blairite Labour Party, but by the neoliberal Tory party. So let's just have perhaps a reconfiguration of where we think the centre and the extreme parameters lie in the real world. But I don't rise to talk about that. The very simple point I would like to make more generally, and it pertains to this proposition from Deputy Le Fondre as well, is that I firmly believe that equality is a key measure, economic equality, when it comes to running just and also good and happy and economically vibrant societies. There's many studies that show that in societies where the gap between the richest and the poorest is narrow as opposed to being quite high, then that's where you get better societies, better economic functioning, because actually everybody can afford to participate economically and socially, and also, of course, culturally, in the life of that island. In our case, interestingly, what we see is that the tendency is within the public sector generally, and we all criticise. Indeed, my colleague on the senatorial campaign, I think, quite rightly in many ways, criticised the high end of the civil service, who are often getting high wages, and we saw some very high levels and very public examples of wastage that was taking place. And it's absolutely right that every member in the Assembly speaks out against that and does what we can to combat that. And of course, it's imperative that ministers have the right safeguards in place. But putting that aside, globally speaking, when it comes to public sector workers, the amount that the lowest paid public sector worker and the highest paid gets is of much different proportion to that which you see in the private sector. So in the state sector, the difference between the lowest and the highest paid is relatively small. It might be a factor of 15, something like that, between the road sweeper at the top and somebody right at the top of the tree who's getting, perhaps, we know what the figures are. So that's the starting point. And I want to see actually a levelling up rather than a levelling down in pursuit of an equal society. It doesn't mean that everybody's paid the same, of course. It means that it means that you can get people functioning together without the disparities. I would have been interested to know actually whether the figures that the deputy has used are the median or the mean. I don't know if he's touched on that already. I suspect they're the median, which is probably the best figure to use. But of course, the mean would show a completely different picture, especially when it comes to the private sector. I suspect some very high earners out there. And I think the point has been well made already that actually if we were dealing with a public sector which was completely intransigent, which was frozen in aspect, and we had unions and workers who were not committed to public sector reform, then it might be a different scenario. But in fact, we've got something completely different. The public sector and the unions are committed to engaging meaningfully in public sector reform. That doesn't mean that there won't be debates and disagreements, and it doesn't mean that necessarily they or the Council of Ministers will necessarily get what they want all the time, but it means that there is a process to go through, and as we've said in previous debates, that process should be respected, and the negotiations and the good work that's already going on should also be respected. What I would like to see actually is a more global approach to the consideration of pensions. Even in the UK, as I said before, which is not a left-wing country by any means, especially England with their government, that they have a system whereby pensions are now obligatory in the private sector. So that will be rolled out if it's not fully in place at the moment, requiring actually all employers to provide some kind of pension scheme for their employees, because they recognise that ultimately if we have people retiring with no provision of their own, and often without any fault of their own, that's not good for the individuals, it's not good for society, but ultimately it's not good for the taxpayer, because somebody has to pick up the bill, and in our case it would be the Social Security Department. And it has to be said, of course we all live with inequalities, not everybody gets the same, but it doesn't mean we can't do more to improve that. We take a risk if we actually, the good thing about having public sector workers who at least have a pension, contributory, they've paid into it, and of course the employer has paid into it, they won't necessarily be dependent on the state in future. And I don't think that can be said for certainly my generation or those younger than me. We will see people retiring with absolutely no provision. And whilst some people will stand up and say, well, that's their fault, isn't it? They should have made provision for that. It's very difficult to make pension provision in an island such as Jersey, which is so expensive, when you've got no opportunity to actually buy your own house, when you've got no opportunity to save money because all your money's going out in rents, etc. And we will have a situation where you've got long-standing states members even who have been here already 15 years. Perhaps when they retire, they'll have nothing and they'll be knocking on the door of Social Security to get their income support when they retire. I'm not saying that that's wrong, and that's perhaps representative of the wider society, but it's certainly unusual to have parliamentarians, I think, who are in that situation. But why should they be immune is perhaps the argument. The other point perhaps is to do with employer and employee contributions. This idea that perhaps we don't necessarily understand, we can understand contributory contributions for pensions in terms of the employee contribution, because of course they benefit from that. And some people might be thinking, well, what does the employer get out of the equation, because they're just giving money to the employee? Well, of course, there's the wider model, socio-economic consequence, that we want people to be looked after when they actually get to retirement age, if they get to retirement age. But moreover, I see it in a slightly different way. The employee is making provision for themselves from their wages for the future. The employer, of course, pays for the time and the work that they engage from the worker. But the employer's contribution is essentially wear and tear. So when you employ somebody, you employ them for their work and their energy that they give you. But the pension contribution from the employer is essential wear and tear that they will need to be dealing with later on. Because if they hadn't been working, of course, they'd be in pristine condition, more or less, when they come to the age of retirement. Many are not in pristine condition, it must be said, when they get to the age of 65, 67 or 69, which may well be in the future. And I think all these things need to be considered in the round. I don't think this proposition does that. But let's not kid ourselves, provision is going to be more difficult in the future, and I would like to see a scenario whereby we have a socially democratic leaning government in the future, which knows that pension provision is important, that we don't have a divided society, and rather than always constantly levelling down, attacking teachers, attacking any particular sector of society, and saying they get paid too much, we've got to pay them less and less, and decreasing the state. Actually, we need to stand up and say, no, there is a function of the state which is valid. It must be protected. And neither the so-called centre government that we have or the right is willing to do that. Both are cutting back on the state. It's just a case of who cuts back quicker than the rest. There needs to be a party, I believe, and a grouping of politicians who say, no, we do need a proper centrist approach to politics, and it's not coming from the mainstream, as currently is the case.
Any other member wish to speak on the amendment? On Deputy Fondray to respond.
Thank you, sir. It actually wasn't as bad as I was expecting, I must admit. Right. I think it was a little bit sad that actually there's all sorts of accusations in a way being thrown in my direction that I didn't value the public sector, that I was attacking various people, it was all doom and gloom, etc., etc. I know certain people, Assistant Minister, the Chief Minister's just left, but he and I will disagree somewhat, and I tend to find he is over-optimistic, and I would tend to prefer myself to be prudent. Plan for the worst, be prudent, and if you get the money in, brilliant, bank it. Then you can spend it. And but what I keep thinking back to, it's not about whether we have a good quality public sector workforce. I think we do. We must have valued employees, because otherwise we would have some real problems here. Equally, we've got some very good people and a good private sector workforce. They're not that different in terms of this, they do different functions, but people in the private sector work hard, people in the public sector work hard. And all I'm trying to say is actually, what it looks like is that the public sector pension scheme is overly generous at the moment, and particularly given what's looked like coming ahead. That was the point about if you keep doing things the same way, you end up with the same result. We are in a time of change. We need to start thinking about these long-term things. And so there was a comment made about, we're not going to do things, we need the true and latest information. Yes, my comments about the pressures on the financial forecasts were obviously completely made up. Or possibly, we refer to the Treasury documentation that we had in on the in the last few weeks anyway, which certainly this is a briefing that corporate had, and obviously it's in the IFG comments that came out last week, and broadly speaking that by 2020 our revenue is going to be 9.5 million lower, probably recurring. That the plans to actually cover this are going to be taken out of our reserves. If one goes back, I'm going to say 5 years, but certainly if you go back 10 or 15 years, touching the rainy day fund was anathema. We didn't do it. And yet here we are, we're taking an extra 16 million out to cover the difference. That means we're going to be funding, as I said, revenue expenditure out of capital. What I'm trying to say is there are indications now that things are changing, that our financial pressures are getting harder. And that is about then looking forward. And I'm sorry, am I not right in saying that the council ministers want to introduce a waste charge, they want to introduce a health charge, they're obviously talking about a hospital funding charge, and that all of these are going to be falling onto, I will say, taxpayers and islanders, depending, we don't actually know necessarily what they're going to look like. And, we've got to take time, we've got to negotiate. Absolutely. Actually, I think it was Senator Green said it took years to negotiate last time round. Well, the comments in the Council of Ministers was 18 months. So, and the point is, it's setting a marker. It's saying, yes, this is something we need to do. In fact, the Chief Minister should welcome this amendment because in terms of the whichever group he was saying weren't in favour of increasing from where they are, this might just encourage them because otherwise they might get more than they asked for. But actually, how much consultation and notice did we get when we put GST up on all consumers from 3 to 5%? How much say did the islanders, our employers, actually have ultimately? And that's what I keep trying to take it back to, is that times are changing and we are putting further and further pressure on all islanders, and personally I think particularly Middle Jersey. If one looks at, and I've lost the graph now, sir, but that wonderful graph on the healthcare charge, I'm sure actually under Deputy Mezik's future proposition we'll be looking at it again. And it kind of starts up, I think it hits 1% at about 50,000 odd, and then it starts going away from 1% at about the 120,000 mark. So that means that if that's Middle Jersey, not sure about the top end of that, we're going to be charging those people 500, 600, 700, 800 pounds a year more. And that's coming. And that's coming in 2019. And bear in mind, as I said, this latest update, obviously completely not valid. Got Treasury at the top of it. Can't be valid, can it? Isn't that the latest information? Isn't that the information that says we have a further financial problem and it's about £9 million odd? This isn't going to solve the problem. It's about mindset. It's about changing things. It's about sending a message. And bear in mind again, we're actually at the very tight level that having taken an extra 16 million out of our reserves by 2020, our surplus at the end of, 2019, our surplus at the end of 2019 is £500,000. We are that tight. I don't think there's really that much more to say, other than to say, to emphasise again, what this does or would do is gradually increase the employee rate. It would decrease the employer rate to an average of about 12%. I do emphasise it's averaged, it gets complicated. Just to remind the Chief Minister, actually, with his memory lapse, the present employer rate for uniform services will be 20%, as I understand it. So, as I said, sir, it is not about whether you value one more or less than the other in terms of private sector workers and public sector workers. It is about this differential that we are all paying for. That says it. I fully expected the comments that we got, the comments we received. I wanted to put the marker down that at some point, I think this needs to start changing, and it's up to members if they want to send that message or not. Thank you, sir.
Maintain the amendment?
Call for an appel, sir, and maintain the position.
Well, the appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of voting. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been rejected. 10 votes pour, 34 votes contre, no abstentions.
The 10, sir.
10 is answered.
The 10 votes pour are Senator Ferguson, Constables of St Saviour and St John, Deputy of Greville, Deputy Hilton, Lafondre, Kevin Lewis, Andrew Lewis, Labby and Deputy MacDonald.
Well, we now come to Amendment 8 in the name of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph A1, after the words as set out in summary table B, insert the words, except that net revenue expenditure shall be decreased for each ministerial department and non-ministerial state-funded body in 2017, 2018 and 2019 by an amount to be calculated by the Department for Treasury and Resources in order to reduce the vacancy rate defined as budgeted against actual FTE for that department or body in 2016 to a maximum of 3%. Page 2, paragraph A1, remove the words "Within relation to the head of expenditure of the Health and Social Services Department, the approval of £5 million in each of the financial years 2017 to 2019, dependent in accordance with Article 16.4 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2005, on the approval by the states of the transfer of these sums from the Health Insurance Fund to the Health and Social Services Department." Page 2, paragraph A2, after the words as set out in summary table C, insert the words "except that the total proposed contingency amount for the financial years 2017 to 2019 be increased by an amount equal to the reduction in net revenue expenditure specified in paragraph 1 above." Page 2, paragraph A2, from the amount identified in paragraph 3 above shall be deducted £5 million in 2017, £12,500,000 in 2018 and £20 million in 2019, which will remain in the consolidated fund to replace and be used for the same purposes as the proposed health charge and the transfers from the health insurance fund. Page 2, paragraph C shall be deleted.
Deputy Lafondre.
think, as I say, so I could be a sucker for punishment today, but this is actually a proposition or an amendment being brought by the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. So in our report, we've highlighted of our corporate services on the MTFP that the States is carrying a very high vacancy rate of 12.9%. And that is included in the figures in the expenditure that we will be being asked to approve. So this means that departments are receiving money for the posts, but the posts are not being filled. We have been advised that a comparable rate in the UK public sector for funded vacancies is 3 to 5%, although some local councils impose a zero rate and then imply a further efficiency saving. So then we are therefore proposing to reduce the vacancy rate for all departments down to 3%. The calculations would be undertaken by the Department for Treasury and Resources, as they will be in possession of the most up-to-date information. Reducing the rate to 3% would still allow departments to retain almost a quarter of their current level of vacancies. And by reducing the rate down to 3%, we've calculated that this would raise over £35 million a year. And members have got a sheet in front of them. I shall talk that through them shortly. At its heart, this amendment is about instilling budgetary discipline in an area where there appears to be a lot of slack in the system. And to be honest, there also appears to be a lot of effective control or reporting in this area. There are a lot of temporary staff, a lot of posts being held open. We should not be increasing the financial burden on islanders when there is still potential for savings to be made within the public sector. And of course, the panel supports investment in health and education, etc. However, evidence suggests that we can reduce expenditure through other means sufficient to negate the need for the health charge. Just repeat that. Sufficient to negate the need for the health charge during the course of this MTFP. On the health charge itself, one of the panel's findings was that the argument for imposing a charge for health had not really been adequately made at this stage. And we also recommended that the health charge should be withdrawn unless the Council Ministers can demonstrate that there are no further savings and efficiencies that can be made within the public sector. In the case of vacancies, there are clearly still further savings that can be made. 35 million, as I said, it's slightly more than that is raised, is more than enough to negate the health charge and associated transfers from the Health Insurance Fund. The money over and above these amounts would be put into contingency and would be available if departments can demonstrate a genuine need for the vacant posts. Sorry, so I was just going to wait for people to stop shuffling around. Right, over the life of the MTFP, this would raise about £107 million. 37.5 would be needed to cover the health charge, but there would still be £69 million held in contingency to cover for genuine needs over and above the 3% vacancy rate that is left with departments. The Council Ministers in their comments on the amendment make reference to the impact of this amendment on departments. However, it must be remembered that these are vacant posts being removed from the system, not posts with people in them, according to the reporting. We highlighted in our report that the vacancy rate gives departments the chance to make easy savings, and this is the real concern here. The comments also refer to posts that are currently being recruited to or covered by agency staff. That's fine. If these posts are indeed genuinely needed, they'll be covered by the 3% vacancy rate that departments will retain, plus an allocation from the funds put into contingency. Now, sir, what I'd like to do is just talk through the sheet. I'm sure other panel members will make reference to it as well. If one looks at Table 1 on the sheet that's been circulated, members will see that the calculation of the financial value of the total vacant posts is just over £46 million a year. Okay? what we are saying is that if we leave 3% in the departments, okay, so it will, sorry, start again. Go to table 2. If we take 3% from the vacant posts and leave those with the departments, that would free up, in table 2, the vacancy saving of about 35,747,000 a year. That's the top row in table 2, takes you to 107 million in total. As members will see, the next line shows actually the costs of the health charge and the HIF. 2017, 5 million. 2018, 12.5 million. 2019, 20 million. Total, 37.5 million. Under that, there's a line, just an average line, but just to put it in perspective, it's about 12.5 million a year. So that would leave, in contingency, after one has set off those figures, the numbers that say balance and contingency of 30 million, 23 million, and 15 million, 2017, 18, and 19, totaling 69. Now, don't forget, look at the line underneath, there is still a 3% vacancy rate left with the departments of 10, 10, 10. 32 million in total. So what we have calculated is that the total available for vacancies, if you leave the 3% and what is left in contingency after taking out the HIF and the health stuff, in 2017 is £41 million, in 2018 is £34 million, and in 2019 is £26 million, 102 million in total. And we translated that into posts. It's a bit of a rough and ready calculation, but gives members an idea. Just under 800 posts that would cover in 2017. In 2018, just under 651. And in 2019, when in theory all this stuff is in, 500. So we've been told the world would end as a result of this. We've been told the pushback from the departments has been quite incredible, I found. We're going to have to make real cuts in health and education. You know, those really heart-jerking areas that we all want to encourage. And how dare you even think about it? I think the comment says, ultimately the proposition would impose a cut in staffing budgets. That would require all states' departments to cut and cease core services and make permanent staff members compulsorily redundant at a cost of an average £50,000 per employee. Do you think we've upset someone somewhere? Because actually one rather has the impression that what we've actually uncovered is an interesting little stash of contingency hidden away by the chief officers. And the reason I say that is because the rate has been 12.9%. This is based on, as members will look in our amendment at the back table, which I should just refer to, Seth. If one looks in the appendix to our amendment, it's 12.9% based on June 2016. It's over 10% based on September 2015, and it's over 10% in terms of June 2014. So it's not just a one-off blip, it's being carried for quite some time. And when one actually starts getting the kind of pushback we've had, one does have to ask the question, actually, is it realistic? Is it actually realistic that of the volume of that they are going to need, all of the vacant posts, and if you actually take them away, it's going to cause a major disaster? No doubt that's the comments that we're going to hear from the Council of Ministers. But we make the point that in 2019, one would have to be wanting to use 500 posts of the vacancies. And even then, you would still be able to offset the health charge and the HIF and still cover and make a balanced, not upset the finances that we are going to be asked to approve later. I think that's probably enough numbers from me. I hope that makes the point. These are, we consider, reasonable numbers. I emphasize the point that what we are doing, we're taking the money and out of the departments and putting it into contingency. So we're not spending it. We are then offsetting, okay, the measures for the health charge. Bearing in mind the impacts and all that sort of stuff that that health charge is going to have on members of the public. And anything else is there over and above the contingency of £10 million a year that we have left with the departments. For those departments who can justify the jobs, who can justify and say, yes, we need this number of extra posts, provided they can justify that to the Treasury Minister, they have access to those funds we're going to leave in contingency. And in total, those funds in contingency alone, are just under £70 million. Okay? Excluding the extra money that's already sitting in the departments. If you add those together, look at the figure, bottom right, table 2, £102 million. That's after reduction of the HIF and the health charge. And so when this was brought to our attention, basically we felt it was our duty to bring this to members and to have a debate on it. I shall be looking forward to the comments as to why we cannot be doing this and why the world is going to end. But I emphasise, according to the reporting, this is about the vacant posts. It doesn't represent jobs according to their reporting of real people. There will be some element, we know, of overlapping, but we think there is a lot of room in those numbers. And I think at that point, sir, I make the proposition, the amendment, and things like that.
Is the amendment seconded? Senator Green.
Thank you, sir. And second time I've followed my friend Deputy Lafondre, sir. And the world will not end for members of this Assembly if this amendment is accepted. It will end for the most vulnerable in society, but more on that later. So this amendment is based on the flawed appreciation of how the states of Jersey manage its headcount. The proposer fails to recognise the dynamic nature of vacancy management and significant amounts of change that's been undertaken throughout departments. So in the Council of Ministers' comments, we stated the overall effect of this amendment would be to remove proposed growth in the staffing budget, including for the priority areas of the MTFP, such as health and education, and more on that later. So it would impose additional savings on all departments. Perhaps Deputy would say, well, that's the point. But it would be savings above those already proposed to meet the financial envelope approved by the states when we debated the MTFP last October. So what staggers me most is that the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, on page 1 of their report, say the savings appear to be aspirational, and then go on to add another £35 million worth of savings. I hope members, sir, I don't want to use the term savings actually, sir, because if this amendment is accepted, it will not be a saving. If this amendment is accepted, it will cost more than it currently does to run our services. And I'll speak more on this later. The overall effect of this amendment would be to remove the proposed growth in staffing budgets, as I said, including the priority areas such as health and education. So care in the community would be affected, as will mental health and children's services. And I'll explain why in a moment. For education, the effect would also be to impose additional savings on the department already proposed by the MTFP debate in 15. These savings, I have already said, have been described by the panel that have brought this proposition as aspirational. They're aspirational, they don't believe we can achieve them. By the way, here's another 35 million. The manpower budget for the States of Jersey was agreed in the debate that we had, and the proposed figures have been calculated by departments based on the cost of the manpower required to deliver the service. So we do not have some sort of slush fund of vacancies sitting there to bulk up our funding, and I'll explain for my own department in detail in just a minute. The proposal, sir, is unbelievably naive. It fails to recognise that all organisations have a turnover. So this vacancy of 888 full-time employees in June 16 include posts that are under recruitment, actively under recruitment. Indeed, posts for which offers of employment have already been made. It also includes posts that have been put in there awaiting the development of new services. And again, I will cover this when I talk about my department in particular, Health and Social Services. The vacancy rate changes on a daily basis. We're a big organisation. As people leave employment, retire, move on to other jobs, and as other employees start. So it will impact on events. It's also, the vacancy factor is also impacted by events that happen through the year. For example, the vacancy factor in education will be higher in the school summer break, as appointments are not yet in place for the new academic year. Contracts may well have been signed and agreed, but the people haven't actually started work. And I'd like to just say something about vacancy management, sir. I'm sure the ministers of each department will have some detail and some comment to make for each of their departments. But at the end of August, the states were, for a variety of different reasons, using 181 agency workers to cover vacant posts. Health and Social Services alone, with education alone, using 237 full-time equivalent to cover temporary workers. My own department employs agency and locum staff in relation to health-related professions, locums, bank nurses, sometimes to cover vacant posts, sometimes to cover speciality posts, such as consultants on leave, sir. Education uses supply teachers and temporary lecturing staff. These are non-permanent members of staff. None of these workers were accounted for in the vacancy rate. However, the budget from the vacant posts are used to fund this arrangement. We've got to have some way of being able to pay those people that you bring in as locums or bank nurses or supply teachers. To be clear, the proposed reduction in vacancies would equate to an 8%, this is what really worries me, an 8% cut in budget on top of the current savings already agreed within the MTFP. So to be specific, for Health and Social Services, it will remove £17 million more. £17 million on top of the savings that we've agreed to make in an area that is considered to be a priority by the Council of Ministers. That's 12% of our budget, sir. And to put it into context, it would be the whole, I'm not saying that we would do this, we wouldn't be this irresponsible, but it would equate to the entire funding for our mental health services. So currently, the Department, Health and Social Services, are recruiting to 130 of these vacancies, with offers of employment or signed contracts already in place. In some cases, as I've referred to before, posts are being covered by temporary staff, and that those wages, that budget against those vacant posts, are being used to pay those staff. Now, they're being used where we have been unable to attract or recruit, for whatever reason, permanent staff. For example, in CAMS, or the 55 extra social workers we're putting into children's and adult social services. These still show as vacancies because we've been unable to fill them with permanent staff, but there are temporary and locum staff covering those posts. We are holding 48 posts to be removed from the establishment. That's 48 posts that we've managed to reduce our establishment by in making efficiencies. Those 48 posts show on our books, and they're going to be removed at the end of the year. And that's fine, you can have those 48 posts. We've managed to bank those. There are 35 posts that are sitting there as approved by P82. P82, I brought along to talk about P82 quite a lot, sir, when we're talking about service development or service cuts. And for the newer members, it might be worth getting hold of P82 2012, the Health Social Services, A New Way Forward. So this is putting us in a position whereby we are doing things differently. We're investing in community, we're investing in primary care. 35 posts are there waiting for those developments to happen as planned. So in my own department alone, there are actually only 21 posts that are true vacancies. Now, if you take those away, that means that we lose all flexibility. I don't mean it means that we lose the money. What I mean is that if, for example, somebody in administration retires, and we decide that we want to take 3 nurses instead, if you take those 21 away, we've got no flexibility. Because you've lost 1 post and you need to bring 2. You want to replace it with 3, so that's 2 extra. I don't think it's unreasonable to have 21 posts in a big department that are true vacancies. So touching briefly on other departments, and I'm sure the ministers will add detail to this, if we cut the amendment, if we go with the amendment and cut the vacancy rate to 3%, in education, the proposed reduction in vacancies would be the equivalent of 7 million. 7% cut in education, which is one of our priorities, education and health, one of our priorities, another 7% cut. To put that in context, that would be, and again, I'm sure the minister wouldn't do this, but it would be the entire funding for the youth service, the careers service, and the early years provision, including NEF. For the Department of Infrastructure, they would lose 23% of their staffing budget, £5.1 million. This would nearly double the amount already required to be saved as part of their transformation of service reviews. Furthermore, sir, the Department of Infrastructure acts as a service provider for a number of states' departments, most of which attract an income stream which offsets the cost. Removing the staff budgets would leave the Department of Infrastructure with an unachievable income target, no means of delivering the service. So the Chief Minister's Department would be required to lose 31.8 full-time equivalents, 1.66 million, despite the fact that we've already agreed the figure in the MTFP. This would result, sir, in the IS department, our computer department, if you like, I can't think of the right words, information technology department, not having the funds required to enter into contracts with suppliers or to be able to refill the vacant posts and deliver key services. It would need to reduce other corporate areas of delivery, including HR, and the consequences would be very significant reduction in the provision of IT and human resources across the states. The Department for Community and Constitutional Affairs would find it challenging and difficult, I'm advised, sir, to meet their statutory requirements in prison, as well as putting in jeopardy the Police and Drug Intelligence Unit. So ultimately, the proposition would impose a cut in staffing budgets that would require all states' departments to cease core services, to make permanent. It's not a threat, sir. If this is accepted, this is what will happen. We will have to make a number of permanent staff compulsory redundant. But before concluding, sir, the cost of each redundancy is estimated on an average of 50,000. But before concluding, I'd like to speak not as a minister, but as a former senior line manager. And I promised you more on this earlier on. So if successful, this amendment will not bring about a reduction of £35 million, as claimed. We are fortunate, and I think we all agree that, despite the banter that we might have, we are fortunate, sir, to be supported by very hard-working, dedicated staff who I know will do their utmost to reduce the impact of any reductions on the public. I know they will, sir. But this will mean redundancies above those we've already planned, and those that remain will have to cover what services we can. And that cover, sir, won't come at basic rate, because you've taken away the establishment. That cover will come at time and a half and double time. And I've seen this time and time again as a line manager when they've frozen vacancies. You go to somewhere like Sandybrook Hospital, and I'm speaking from experience, where you've got one catering assistant in the kitchen and she's off, or he's off, could be a he as well. there's 100% loss in the shift. You have to cover that. And that will have to be covered on time and a half or double time. There's no getting away from that. So this £35 million saving, if you continue to run services as we would like to meet the needs of the most vulnerable in our society, we will have to do that at double time and time and a half. It's a falsehood, sir, to say there would be a saving. So I hope I've convinced members that this would not be cheaper, not unless we actually stop doing some of the core things that we're already doing. That wouldn't be as irresponsible as to shut down the whole of mental health services, but we may have to shut down a bit of everything in our services. So in conclusion, the Council of Ministers has already prioritised on the strategic priorities of the states. This amendment undermines the process. I have to say, when I saw this, you had to hold me down. I could not believe how naive it was and the damage that it would do. So the prioritisation carried out by the Council of Ministers has been extensive. And we've carried it out alongside ongoing spending reviews. We've been supported by external advisors to identify where savings and efficiencies across the states and within individual departments may be achieved. The prioritisation of available funding has evolved over that discussion and over several versions of proposals before we agreed the allocations. And believe me, those discussions were lively and robust. Significant work has been carried out in the period since the debate in 2015 to finalise our proposals. The proposals have been refined and based on the consideration of the impact on levels of service, which I hope I've shown members. Each department has prioritised its available funding. The final proposals were then subject to a distributional analysis and a series of ministerial reviews to assess the impact on services, sir. The Council of Ministers believes it's presenting a sustainable package, but this amendment will completely undermine that, sir. The Deputy also talked about, well, we can put some of it in contingency, and if the departments want it, then they can make a bid for it. But you can't spend the money twice. You can't put the money aside in place of, as a health fund and then say it's also available, by the way, for departments that still need it. And I hope I've convinced members that for my department and all the other departments, because I've touched on the other departments, but for my department, we need it. And you're not going to make those savings. You're going to increase costs if you accept this amendment. So the package puts at risk, I think, P82, Health and Social Services, a way forward. The P82 to transform health and social services to meet today and tomorrow's continuing care needs. So in P82, we said to do nothing is not an option. Support this amendment and that will be the outcome. Thank you, sir. I usually just ask members to reject this amendment. I'm not going to do that today, so I'm going to beg them to reject it. I'm really going to beg them. This will put at the heart of some of the services we're providing in jeopardy, and I think hit the most vulnerable in our society. We'll try and negate, if it's accepted, we will try and negate as much as we can, sir, but it will mean wholesale redundancies, increased costs, and reductions in service. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Ryans.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the Health Minister. Members will remember last Friday there was a meeting at St Paul's where the government was outlining its proposals for the MTFP. And I arrived late because I've been attending the Duke of Edinburgh's meeting up at Crabbe with His Royal Highness. And I got there and it had just about finished at the time. And I spoke to my finance director. And I don't know, in all the time that I've known her, both as an assistant minister and minister, I've ever seen her so concerned. And I took her aside and I said, what's the matter? And she said, I'm really, really worried. And I said, why? She said, because I don't think members fully understand what this means. And I said, okay, let's sit down and see if we can work out so that we can explain it. Here's my opportunity to do that, just as the health minister articulated. So I'm just going to read out in a second what she says. But it is, just as the health minister said, this is really important that members understand this. So This amendment is based on a flawed understanding of how the State of Jersey reports and manages its full-time posts. It's a misunderstanding that could cost the Education Department £7 million, doubling our savings target and putting immense pressure on our system. And it needs to be explained. It's complicated, but let me walk you through it. There are two ways of counting FTEs. FTE stands for full-time equivalent. The first is actual FTE, which is simply the number of people working for us on a permanent basis at any given time. The second is budgeted FTE. This is a different figure. It is the number of people we expect to employ by the end of the calendar year. Since 2015, this number has included temporary staff who work for us regularly. In education, that means supply teachers, sessional youth workers, Highlands visiting lecturers, and others. These staff are all essential to keep our schools, youth projects, and the college running. We know that we need them every year, so they are included in the budgeted FTE. The actual FTE and the budgeted FTE for education are different by 107 because there are 69 supply teachers in schools, 10 sessional youth workers, 26 Highlands lecturers, and 2 library staff. These staff have to be paid, so they are included in the budgeted FTE, but they are shown as vacancies. So far, so good. However, the budgeted FTE is not as straightforward as it sounds. This is because the financial calendar year and the academic year do not match up. Our budgeted FTE has to include any extra staff we might need for the start of the new school year in September. Because of this, it always looks like we are overestimating and have a large number of vacancies. We don't. It's just that these staff have not started working yet. For example, the 2016 budgeted FTE for education will include an extra 44.4 staff for demographics, extra classes for rising pupil numbers, and improving standards, the Jersey Premium. These are not real vacancies. It's a timing issue. If you take away those extra 44 posts, you take out real people on the ground in our schools. There will be classrooms without teachers in September and no one to help the Jersey Premium students. If these supply staff and extra teachers are left out of the number, the percentage of vacancies at education drops from 10.6% to 1.8%, which is reasonable. These are not, as was suggested by the Deputy earlier, hidden pockets of money. We are often accused of shroud waving, but this is real people and real jobs. The impact of this amendment will be significant for education. It equates to 7 million, which is 7% of the total education budget. This will be in addition to the total of 7.7 million savings already included in MTFP2. Therefore, this amendment would double the savings target for education at a time when education is one of the state's strategic priorities. I should mention that education have already included 240,000 savings for vacancy management in this MTFP. If we were unable to utilise these supplies teachers, then schools would not be able to operate, as there would be whole classes without a teacher and youth centres would have to close. We would not be able to reap the benefits of the Pupil Premium Initiative, as there would be no budget or FTE to recruit the staff to the schemes which have demonstrated improvements in standards from the pilot phase. If this amendment is approved, the impact on the education system will be one or more of the following options. Cease all work on early years, saving 4.5 million. Close the career service, saving 0.7 million. Stop all youth work, saving 1.8 million.
Close 8 one-form primary schools. A one-form primary school without a nursery costs $834,000, which would increase average class sizes from 25 to 33. Close 2 secondary schools, saving $8 million. Cease all funding to fee-paying secondary schools, both provided and non-provided, saving about $9 million. Cease all special needs funding and close the special needs schools. I want to reiterate what I've said many times before because it's important. At education, we have a coherent plan, one that has been carefully considered to reshape our education system and make it fit for the future. It's an ambitious yet workable plan. We have gone through a process of reviewing services and budgets, considering whether services could be delivered in a different way, and ensuring that all resources are effectively targeted to outcomes, particularly in relation to raising standards and achievements and supporting vulnerable families. We are underway, but we've only had one full academic year of this new direction. And if we are to succeed, then this amendment must be rejected. If approved here today, it would effectively destroy our plans to raise standards and make improvements. More than that, it would do severe, lasting, and unnecessary damage to the education system. We are already proposing savings, and whilst difficult, are all deliverable. If other savings were possible, then they would have been included in the MTFP2 document already. At this time, it is not possible for education to make another 7 million of cuts. Services would have to be stopped, and children would suffer as a consequence. If you thought that the NEF problem was bad yesterday, just consider this. In summary, I strongly oppose this amendment and urge all members to reject it. It is based on a flawed appreciation of how the State of Jersey manages its workforce, and the savings imposed on the Education Department as a result would mean the closure of frontline services at a time when education is a state strategic priority. We would be failing our children. I cannot support this amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Andrew Lewis.
Thank you, sir. We've just heard two emotional and very good speeches from two extremely important departments which we're trying to put more money into anyway, which is education and health. There is a bigger issue here, though, and it's just basically the management of our entire public sector. I've just Googled some figures on vacancy run rates in the UK, and the NHS, for example, ranges anything from 1.1 in the northeast of England, so 1.7 rather, to 7.2 in the East Midlands. Those are their run rates. County councils are even lower. That's general public sector within the county councils. Some county councils operate on a, self-funding ones at least, operate on a zero figure, plus minus 3%. The whole idea of this is so that you're not running a high vacancy run rate, so you're applying your budgets on a zero budgeting basis to all the things you need to do in that county. So I would say, sir, here that we have basically a flawed process, which makes it very difficult for the Minister of Education and the Minister of Health to actually fully identify what the real vacancy run rate is. And instead what appears to be happening, sir, is that if you have a vacancy run rate, you can then use the money you haven't used in that vacancy run rate for a carry forward to assist your budget planning for the following year. To me, this is really poor accounting. This isn't real life. And that's where the problem is, which makes the job of the Minister of Education really difficult, so that he then has this barrage of opposition from his staff, and quite rightly. And when you listen to the health ministers, I mean, anybody would think the whole system was going to shut down the way he was describing that. And if you assess it statistically in the way that he is suggesting Deputy Fondre is trying to do, then yes, that's what would happen. I don't believe that's what Deputy Fondre's intentions are at all. What he's trying to do is get real transparency on vacancy run rate. And we don't have that at the moment. So if this debate does nothing else, it needs to focus the minds of the Council of Ministers, their statistics units, and the management in those two key departments, health and education, as to how they account for vacancy run rate. In businesses, sir, this is extremely important, because often your largest overhead in any service sector industry, of which the public sector is largely service sector, albeit publicly owned, is your headcount, your employees. It's a huge amount of money. And in health and education, it's our biggest. Yet we don't really have a proper handle on the figures per our vacancy run rate. And that is a complete flaw. If we take the figures that we have at the moment in Deputy Fondre's proposal here, we've got a run rate, so I believe, of 12%. Yeah? And we're looking at a national average across the whole NHS of about 4%. So tell me, so perhaps somebody can tell me, are we just not comparing apples with apples? Is the NHS so different to our own health authority? Are we managing that vacancy rate so differently that it is just you just can't compare? Even though we have like a microcosm of the NHS, we supply so many different services in Jersey that often in the UK that we've done in a multitude of hospitals. So it should be easier, surely, to measure what you're doing in terms of your vacancy run rate. We should not be using this situation to create carry-forwards, particularly in education, it would appear, to then fund that school. The amount of times that I've heard head teachers who I've met in my district, I have a lot of schools in my district, sir, who say, yeah, we're running that one light at the moment because in order to meet my budget, I need to keep that vacancy open for a little bit longer. I find that an astounding way to manage a business of, in this case, the business of education. So I don't take on board, I do take on board what the Health Minister is saying, if that's what would really happen because of the way they're measuring their vacancy run rate. But if they're measuring it like that, so they simply shouldn't be. It doesn't give you a true picture of how your business is actually operating. It's a major flaw, I think, in the way that we manage that element of our expenditure. And it is a huge amount of our budget, headcount. So I'm minded to vote for this proposition for the simple reason that the Council Minister will have to go away and work out how to do this. And actually, what they'll have to do is manage it better. Now, I've had meetings with the Treasury Minister before, and he said one of his greatest concerns is how departments manage their vacancy rate. In other words, when they have a vacancy, there was a habit in the past of immediately advertising and replacing it. Now, I believe that's got a lot better, and I think we have the Treasury Minister to thank for that, because he's made departments more accountable on that basis. He could do so much more, though, because with this proposal, each department is not going to be denied and told you can't have this person, you can't have that service, you can't provide it, you don't have the person to do it. They will simply have an extra loophole to jump through to the Treasury Minister and his officers to make sure that that vacancy isn't being kept open for any other reason other than a very, very legitimate one, not to create a carry forward, which is what has happened in the past. So I think this is a good loop to jump through, or hoop to jump through. Yes, it might create a bit more work, but look at the savings. You could be saving up to £40 million in your cash flow, which is what a business will be looking at. And that's what we should be seriously looking at, and we're not. Yet the Treasury Minister says he wants to get a better handle on vacancy run rate. He wants to make sure people are not running light for budgetary reasons. And this is his opportunity to do exactly that, because they'll have to come and talk to the Treasury Minister first, sir. That doesn't mean you're going to stop mental health services being provided or a nursery closing down. That's not what this is about at all. Deputy Fondre is the last thing on his agenda is to shut down all those key services, which as an Assembly we've all agreed we should be spending more money on, health and education. That's not his intention at all. But what this is about is getting that management of your vacancy run rate much, much better. And I don't think it's good enough, sir. We are talking here about millions of pounds of public money that is not being clearly stated as to how it's being managed. And budgets being propped up by carry forwards as a result of vacancies occurring. So I listen with great respect from the Health Minister and his passion to keep those services going. But I'm sorry, he's been hoodwinked into believing that this process is, that Dr. Fondre is suggesting, is completely flawed on the basis of how he currently accounts for his vacancy management. And that, sir, I think needs to change. Thank you, sir.
Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee because he has put his finger on the nub of this proposal, because there is something very wrong in the management information system if these vacancies are not really vacancies at all. It's just a timing difference. I won't repeat everything that was said, but, if it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I've spent time in the public sector, and vacancies and maintenance have traditionally been members of actually rearranging your budget. And this is obvious. This is a splendid amendment to the MTFP because it really has pointed out a significant problem, and as Deputy Lewis has said, it is a significant problem which is costing us a lot of money. I hope members will support this worthwhile amendment.
Deputy Doublé?
Thank you, sir. Would you permit me to remain seated?
Yes.
To speak. Thank you. I'm not going to support this this amendment, but I do thank the panel for bringing it because I think it raises some important issues that we're discussing today. I think it shows, from the Education Minister, he did try to explain to the Assembly how it works in a school, and I can see that if there is a class that doesn't have a teacher, there's a vacancy there, we're not just going to leave that class without a teacher. A supply teacher is brought in. But the teacher that may have just left the post could have been at the top of the pay scale as an experienced teacher. And then the supply teacher that comes in could be paid at a much lower rate, meaning that there is some extra money there. And I think this has been described as a lifeline to our schools by when we were on a visit recently. So that's the first issue, that particularly in education, it highlights the fact that things are very tight in some departments, and I think particularly in education it underlines that, that there possibly isn't enough money in that particular department. But more generally, clearly there's work to be done. I'd like to know for all of the departments, perhaps some of the departments where the services to the public aren't as direct as perhaps health and education. Where is that extra bit of money going, and what is it being spent on? So I agree with Deputy Andrew Lewis there. I'd really like to know where that money's going, and see some improved financial management there. So we've heard from the ministers what can't be done. I'd like to hear what can they do to help members in that respect, and what can they do to tighten up the financial management there. And also, another concern I have is if you're managing a department, you're managing staff, and you have a vacancy which you're filling with supply workers or locum workers, or perhaps workers on 0 hours contracts at a lower rate, what incentive do you have as a manager to actually fill that post with a permanent member of staff with a contract? And I'm concerned that actually having people who are managing these departments, and they're getting that little extra bit of money because they're employing temporary staff on a slightly lower wage, I think that's disadvantaging the employees. They might not be getting that more permanent contract with the pensions and the benefits that would normally go with the job, and they might be stuck on a 0 hours contract. So that's just an issue that I've been aware of that I'd like to flag up that's related to this. Perhaps the ministers, some of the other ministers in response could clarify some of my questions there. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Wickenden.
Thank you, sir. Well, after listening to Deputy Bryan's explain how the actual FTEs, budgeted FTEs happens and how it's all sorted, there's no surprise that the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel came up with this amendment as they did. I think they were just trying to look at other options, and that's their job, to be honest, when we're looking at a medium-term financial plan. But did the ministers ever go back and say, is this the right way to budget? Is there not a better way? I mean, I too, certainly over the financial crisis, was working in the private sector as a line manager like Deputy Green, Senator Green, sorry. And I had many times where all the staff was frozen. If I needed another member of staff, I needed to go almost cap in hand to the board of directors and say, I need this person, do a business case, and it was either approved and I received the money or it didn't. But we had zero-based budgeting. So we knew where our money was, and there was a pot of money, which in this world would be held by the Treasury Minister. And you would go to him and say, well, we need a locum, or we need a supply teacher now. Can we have the money for that? Or can we budget it in a different way to say that we're doing it? But it's not clear, and it probably should. Zero-based budgeting isn't that hard. The police have recently just done an amazing job of it. And I think it's fantastic and it should be carried along. But you can't blame the Corporate Service Scrutiny Panel for coming up with an alternative option. I think they've been quite clever in what they thought they were doing. I cannot support it, and I don't think any of us can. It would, the way that it's accounting and how it's used, totally cause complete trouble to what the public services are trying to do. But you can't blame them. But we need to get better with our accounting. We need to start showing what we're doing and how we're doing it better, because it's clearly not the right way that we're doing it now. So let's have this as a shot across our bows and do something better. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Conor Talbot and John.
Thank you, sir. Senator, the Minister of Health said the savings in the MTF proposal are aspirational. That was what the Corporate Scrutiny Panel said. Let me be more precise. The savings that the Council of Ministers are proposing are aspirational, not the savings we are. We've identified an area where, to put it into English, it's a pair of baggy, skin-tight trousers. You can't have a pair of baggy, skin-tight trousers because that's what's called an oxymoron, of course I'm led to believe. I agree with the moronic bit, but not the oxy bit. What has become very clear in this debate is that the management information and the accounting processes are simply not fit for purpose. When running a business, the most important thing is that you know where every penny goes and where every penny comes from. And if you don't, then you are in the dark. And we have a Council of Ministers that are very clearly in the dark. What the Corporate Scrutiny Panel is proposing is removing the bagginess from those skin-tight trousers. And I'll just give you some figures. In December 2013, the states employed 6,210 FTEs, which has been explained as full-time equivalents. This comes from the statistics unit, and it's rounded to the nearest 10 persons. In December 2015, 2 years later, we're employing 6,130 FTEs. Brilliant. 100 people less in 2 years. Hold on. Where's the catch? The catch is called Ports of Jersey and Andium. 320 jobs have been removed from the states into those arm's length businesses. So we've had a net increase in the last 2 years of over 200 extra personnel between 2013 and 2015. To give an example, the Department of Infrastructure had a very controversial scheme last year to remove some staff through a voluntary severance process. And somebody who took that voluntary severance came to me and said, I'm really angry because I thought I was doing my bit. I took early retirement. I'm following a few of my passions, only to find somebody else has been given that job. Where was the saving in that? So the question I have is the suggestion I have is very simple. What we're proposing is that the vacancies are taken away at the beginning of the year. The 12.9% vacancies, the money that would be earmarked to the departments is put into contingencies. We're not taking it away, we're just putting it into contingencies. Then, during the year, if you require an extra teacher, an extra doctor, an extra consultant, you make your case and you get what you need. But at the same time, what we're suggesting is that if voluntary redundancy or some form of staff reduction mechanism has taken place, we need to take the post away and not leave that there as part of the bagginess in a skin-tight pair of trousers. A simile is if your child has pocket money of £8 a week to go and spend on sweeties. Oh, sorry, I slipped up there. We need to put it into words the council and ministers understand. £8 to invest in the confectionery industry. You don't give him £10 and say, can you bring me the change? You give him £8. And that is what we are proposing. And I urge members to be prudent. Oh, sorry, that's what the Treasury Minister says. So we are of one accord. Could we please be prudent? And could we please support this proposition? Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Kevin Lewis.
Thank you, sir. Just very, very briefly, sir. I will be supporting this. I'll speak very briefly because the Constable of St John has put everything admirably. And having previously been in the confectionery business, I do appreciate his comments. I would take issue with some of the things that have been said. This is the Minister for Education says he doesn't like shroud waving, but finishes speeches by saying if we accept this, then we may have to close down a special needs school, which I thought was ultimate in shroud waving. This is just an accountant's procedure, sir. We're putting the money back to Treasury, so if these vacancies need to be filled in the future, they will be there. No one is taking anything away, and I urge people to support the amendments.
So can I seek a point of clarification from the last speaker?
Yes, you can.
So I just asked if the deputy could explain to me, if you put some money in the contingency fund and there is a need for it, we use it, how are you going to fund the health service? Because it's meant to fund, as I understand it, replace the health fund, sir.
So you just make the case to the Treasurer, sir. It's simple as that.
Well, Deputy Mr Martin.
Shall I propose the adjournment, sir?
It's open to any member to propose the adjournment.
So can I propose, as I did yesterday, that we sit till 1 and come back at 2 for every day that we're during this debate?
So I believe there's a number of us who have meetings that are due to start very soon. I assume that the Environment Minister was going to speak for longer than 4 minutes. So, if that's the case...
I'm happy to speak for 4 minutes if it helps, sir.
To limit your speaking to 4 minutes, Mr. Well, I'm sorry, no, the adjournment has actually been proposed, so we have to decide upon the adjournment. That's the first proposition. Is State seconding that proposition? Members agree to adjourn? Kindly show. Yes, the appell is called for. invite any members not present to sit, and I invite the greffier to open the voting. Every member has had the opportunity of voting, and the greffier to close the voting. The proposition to adjourn has been adopted. 32 votes for, 11 votes contra, no abstentions. Deputy Teddy?
So before we do adjourn, I did raise this yesterday, and whilst we're talking about states' efficiencies, could we agree that in every subsequent day that we sit, if there are any subsequent days, that we have a 1 till 2 lunchtime? As I said, most people seem to manage to do with the 1 till 2. And as long as we've got enough notice of that, I don't see why we couldn't accommodate that in future.
Yes. I think that's a matter that can be proposed at the appropriate time. Could I suggest we propose at the end of today and deal with it at that point, Deputy? I was remiss before formally adjourning. I forgot to call upon the Chairman, who indicated that he wished to consider how we deal with matters on future extension days. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, sir. Despite the fact that I think we have made pretty good progress this morning, I still don't think there's any opportunity, or there's any realistic opportunity of the business being concluded this afternoon. So I would like to propose and suggest to the Assembly, propose to the Assembly that we continue the sitting tomorrow, Friday, in the hope and perhaps even the expectation that we could actually complete the business tomorrow, sir.
Is that proposition seconded? Does any member wish to speak upon whether or not we... Deputy Sutton?
Yes, sir. It's my experience, and it's a fairly lengthy experience now, is that if you go continually back into this chamber, the standard of debate and the brain power you can bring to it goes markedly down. We're far better off, and bad decisions have been made on the 5th day. We're far better off taking a break and coming back on a Tuesday, refreshed something. Doesn't have to take any longer, but would be far better standard of debate and far better thinking and clarity.
Well, any other member wish to speak upon? Senator Fine.
I wonder if any other members share my optimism that with a bit of luck and a fair wind, it could actually be finished today, and that we might consider sitting until 6:30 or 7 o'clock in that eventuality.
Well, I think we must do this in proper sequence. If anyone has anything to say about whether or not we should continue tomorrow, then please, I'll call upon you.
So if I could just add my own thoughts on tomorrow. You get continuity if you carry on to the next day. I think that's very valuable. So I would certainly support the prospect of moving forward tomorrow. Also, members have other commitments on Tuesday, whereas many of us, assuming that this may happen on Friday, have kept diaries pretty free tomorrow. So I would suggest that most members will find it far more convenient and a better continuity debate to roll over to tomorrow.
Deputy Fondry?
Unfortunately, so on the other camp, I'd actually tend to prefer to go to a Tuesday. I'm open to it, but a Tuesday would be my preferred option for me, I agree, because we will have been in
Well, at the moment, if anyone wants to a different date other than continuing tomorrow, you vote against the proposition. So, Senator.
Yes, I was just saying, sir, that normally we haven't. We rarely have come back on a Friday. We've normally put it over to the following week. And some of us have appointments with external bodies tomorrow, so we're not going to be able to be here.
Very well. If no other member wishes to speak on this, then, Chairman, do you have any further observations?
So whichever day we choose is going to be inconvenient for some members. Clearly it's a totally a matter for members or majority of members. I maintain the proposition. Should that get defeated, then clearly we'll move next Tuesday. But the proposition I maintain so that we sit tomorrow.
So was Senator Farland suggesting also that we maybe continued late into this evening?
No, we must deal with one issue at a time, Deputy. We must deal with one issue at a time. The first issue is whether we continue tomorrow if we don't finish business today. Very well. Those in favour of continuing tomorrow, kindly show.
The appel, sir.
The appel is called for. Ask the greffier to open the voting. Greffier to close the voting. The proposition is adopted. 32 votes for, 10 votes contra, no abstentions. Very well. My suggestion is that as the States has voted to adjourn, that we take any other timing issues after the adjournment, whether we stay late this evening or not. And we stand adjourned now until 2:15.